Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into some seriously itchy woolen socks, squeezing into a lumpy straw mattress, and travelling back to Tudor England, because we're talking about what it was like to grow up under the looming shadow of Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and a whole line of monarchs who changed their mind as often as they changed their spouses. And heads. You're not going to survive this. Like literally, there's a good chance you'll be dead before your 12th birthday. But let's not dwell on that. Let's dwell instead on the musty thatch over your head, the odd smells wafting from your neighbours, and the faint, unshakable possibility that someone in your family is secretly Catholic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who else is up at this weird hour. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born sometime between 1485 and 1603, a window of time wedged neatly between civil war and the beginning of global colonisation. Your first breath is probably taken inside a wooden house that's also home to your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, a goat that won't shut up, and at least 5 different plagues hiding in the straw. The air is smoky. Always smoky. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that lets out some of the fire's breath and brings in all the weather. The walls are daubed with a curious blend of mud, straw and something suspiciously cow-like. The floors, dirt obviously. Some wealthier homes have wooden planks, but don't get too excited. They're crooked, warped and squeak like rats being stepped on. The smell in your house is a mixture of boiled cabbage, wet wool and the unmistakable perfume of unwashed humanity. Congratulations, you're in Tudor England. Your birth, though painful for your mother and exhausting for the midwife, is not exactly special. There's no birth certificate, no baby shower, maybe a neighbour shows up with a carved wooden rattle, or a weird root to hang over your crib to keep away spirits. If you're born into a noble family, a scribe might jot your name in the family ledger, and you might even get baptised with wine. But for most of us common folk, you enter the world covered in goose fat and surrounded by nervous relatives whispering Hail Marys just in case you don't make it to sunset. The Tudors are big on omens. If there's thunder on your birthday, your grandmother will spend the week stuffing herbs into door cracks and muttering about devils. If the wind changes while you're being swaddled, you're going to grow up left-handed, definitely a bad sign. There's a lot of fuss over your humours too. Are you choleric? Phlegmatic? No one actually knows what that means, but someone will probably try to fix it by feeding you fennel tea and hanging a dead mole in your cradle. And speaking of cradles, it's not exactly plush. It's probably hand-built, with rough joints and splinters no one bothered to sand down. You're swaddled tightly, like weirdly tightly, in linen wraps, making you look more like a wrapped ham than a baby. The idea is that tight wrapping will make your limbs grow straight, which makes sense until you realise your parents' teeth grow in sideways and nobody seems to care. You're rarely left alone, but not for sentimental reasons. It's just that unattended babies are an open invitation for witches, foxes, and neighbours with sticky fingers. What's remarkable is how little anyone expects you to live. Infant mortality is brutal. Somewhere around 1 in 3 babies doesn't make it past their first year. So people love you, yes, but in a reserved way, just in case. Your name is probably something recycled, like John, Thomas, Anne, or Mary. If you're a girl born into a noble household, they might name you after the Queen, though depending on the decade, that could either be a source of pride or an automatic death sentence. Politics are spicy like that. Around this time, England is just starting to settle down after the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. The Tudors rise to power with Henry VII, who ends the Plantagenet family's endless blood feud by basically marrying the right person and being extremely boring on purpose. Then comes Henry VIII, who is the opposite of boring and manages to marry 6 women, break from the Catholic Church, and gain about £200. By the time you're born, the country is teetering between religious reforms and royal ego trips, all of which means your future depends a lot on who's wearing the crown this month, and how loudly your family prays. Noble babies get wet nurses, servants, and embroidered cushions. Poor babies get goatskin diapers and a hearty sense of resilience. But everyone, rich or poor, is wrapped in superstition. Your parents might burn herbs under your cradle to drive off fairies. They might hang a piece of iron above the door to keep demons out. They might even tuck a dried frog into your mattress. Yes, really, to cure hiccups. There's an apothecary in town who swears by powdered beetles, and someone's uncle keeps trying to cure everything with leeches. One of the earliest signs you're alive and thriving is when you can hold your head up without flopping like a sack of eels. If you can smile, even better. If you can survive a winter without developing rickets, jaundice, or the sweating sickness, then you might just have a chance. It's around this time people stop treating you like a fragile egg and more like a tiny, slightly dirtier adult. You won't remember any of this, of course, but it shapes you. The smells, the smoke, the strange mutterings in the night. You don't know it, but the world is already laying its expectations on you, whether you're meant to serve, stitch, swing a sword, or just survive. Childhood in Tudor England isn't about playtime and cartoons. It's about enduring. It's about starting life in a world that doesn't much care if you make it, and learning to find comfort anyway, in warmth, in routine, and in someone softly humming near your cradle as the fire crackles low. The swaddling doesn't stop for a while. You are trussed up daily, limbs wrapped tight like a Tudor burrito, eyes blinking out from layers of linen. It's not just for show. People genuinely believe it shapes your bones and keeps your insides from leaking out. That's the medical consensus of the time, alongside ideas like bad smells cause disease and never trust a left-handed midwife. Welcome to your early months, where common sense is almost as rare as bathwater. There's a woman who takes care of you most of the time, your mother, or a nurse if you're from wealth. She's the one who changes your cloth wraps, rubs you down with lard or goose fat to keep your skin from chapping, and sings you lullabies with lyrics that honestly sound more like grim warnings. Sleep now lest the devil take thee is not exactly soothing, but it's the cultural vibe. And while she's doing all this, she's probably spitting into your cradle for protection, tying red threads to your wrist, or muttering something in Latin even though she can't actually read. Everyone's terrified of what they call failure to thrive, though they don't have that phrase yet. They just know some babies get weak, turn pale, and fade out of the world no matter how many onions are hung in the windows. They blame witches mostly, or the stars. Mercury in the wrong house, a black dog spotted on the road, your neighbour's weird cough. It's all suspect. One day you might come down with a fever and suddenly there's a priest at your bedside whispering a prayer you don't understand, just in case. At some point you grow a tooth, a single pointy little invader pushing its way through soft gums. The house goes wild, not with celebration, no, with panic. That first tooth is believed to mean all sorts of things, depending on which side of your mouth it appears on. Right side, you're blessed. Left side, someone probably makes the sign of the cross and throws salt over their shoulder. Teething is painful, and they treat it with whatever's lying around. Poppy syrup, chewed crust of bread tied in linen, or the occasional dab of honey mixed with ashes. Don't ask. Sometimes you cry inconsolably. There are no strollers to rock, no cartoons, no Sophie the giraffe. So someone picks you up, bounces you awkwardly, or tries singing again. Or, if you're from a poorer home, they just strap you into a cradle suspended from the ceiling with ropes, give it a nudge, and let you swing while they get back to peeling turnips. If you're lucky, a sibling or bored cousin might tickle your feet. If you're unlucky, they might poke you with a stick to see if you blink. You've been alive just a few months, and already the family priest has blessed you 6 different times. A dog has licked your face more than once, and you've worn at least one article of clothing dyed with onion skins. That's your life so far, but hey, you're still here. Let's talk about medicine for a moment. Medicine is a generous term. Most Tudor remedies are either laughably ineffective or outright hazardous. If you spike a fever, someone might try bleeding you. Yes, bleeding. A little cut on your arm or ankle, just enough to balance your humours. Or they'll make you drink a mixture of rose water and something called unicorn horn powder, which is, spoiler alert, just ground up animal bones sold by shady travelling merchants. You might be given syrup of poppies to calm your restlessness, an early form of opium. Or honey, infused with saffron and crushed ants. If your stomach gurgles, you're fed warm ale with a sprig of mint. For a cough, boiled leeks, vinegar steam and prayer. And always prayer. Religion saturates your existence like smoke in the rafters. Every hiccup, rash decision is framed as a spiritual matter. Curses, sins, divine punishment, it's all on the table. But the most important rule of Tudor babyhood? Don't die. Everyone's trying to keep you alive by sheer force of will and garlic necklaces. It's a group effort. Your mother watches you like a hawk. Your neighbours drop by with tales of whooping cough and warning dreams. Your father occasionally peers into your cradle, says something gruff like, "Looks healthy," and goes back to hoeing a field or arguing about taxes. If you do show signs of vitality, bright eyes, strong lungs, decent head control, You earn a few quiet nods of approval. That's the emotional range of a Tudor compliment. The fringe of society is always whispering too. Herbalists, midwives with questionable reputations, people who claim to know charms passed down through the old ways. There's a growing tension between tradition and reform, between superstition and the budding science of the Renaissance. Some say you need holy water to ward off disease. Others insist a poultice made of crushed frog liver works just as well. There's even a guy in the next village who swears by burying a potato under your pillow. No one knows why. He won't explain. Then there's the religious landscape, which is shifting beneath your swaddled feet like wet clay. Henry VIII's break from Rome throws everything into chaos. One year your town is building a shrine to the Virgin Mary, the next someone's tearing it down. Depending on your parents' allegiance, you're either baptised in a grand ceremony or dunked quickly behind a barn to avoid suspicion. Protestant, Catholic, secretly Jewish, it's all dangerous, and it's all political, and you're smack in the middle of it, spitting up into your blanket. As you start babbling and learning to sit up, your caretakers begin to see your personality forming. Maybe you smile too much, or not enough. Maybe you're loud or solemn, or prone to staring at empty corners, always a red flag. Everyone watches you closely, because children aren't just children. You're omens, future labourers, potential martyrs. Every movement is interpreted, every milestone is charged with superstition, hope, and the practical concerns of survival. Are you strong? Will you work hard? Will you marry well? Will you make it to next winter? You don't know it yet, but the first few years of your life are already shaping your fate. Your diet is basic. Breast milk, if you're lucky. Gruel if you're weaned early. Bits of pottage. Maybe a taste of honeyed bread if you're fussy or adorable. You sleep whenever you're allowed to, which isn't often. The fire crackles nearby. Someone is always singing or mumbling. And outside the door, the chickens and pigs argue through the night. And above it all, the wind moves through the thatch, rattling it like old bones. The stars flicker. Your world is tiny, warm, unpredictable. You don't understand it, but you feel its rhythm. In some quiet part of your new brain, you're already adjusting to the strange lullaby of Tudor life. You're a little older now, still not walking, but definitely more aware. You can grab things, throw things, and scream at maximum volume when a breeze touches your cheek the wrong way. This makes you basically a god in your household. Your cries mean someone rushes over with bread soaked in ale, or a warm corner of the hearth, or if you're really lucky, a shiny spoon to gawk at. You, small and largely incapable of self-defence, are somehow the most important little blob in the room. That is, until you get sick. And you will. Everyone gets sick in Tudor England. Sometimes it's just a cough. Other times it's something called the bloody flux, which we won't go into because you're probably trying to fall asleep here. You spike a fever, and the entire household goes into panic mode. Your mother stops sleeping, your father calls in that one old woman from the edge of the woods who insists on swinging a dead weasel over your crib. You lie there, sticky with sweat, covered in odd-smelling ointments, while two different relatives argue over whether to put garlic under your pillow or lavender. Or both, in a sock. The line between medicine and magic is practically non-existent. Someone might try to feed you a potion made of wormwood vinegar and the ashes of a burned feather. If you scream in protest, they take that as a good sign. Still got fight in him, someone says, and the adults nod solemnly, as though this has any basis in actual fact. The fever might break, or it might not. If it doesn't, your parents quietly start talking about arranging a proper burial. This is normal. Grim, yes, but completely normal. Every family has buried a baby. Most have buried several. Let's assume you pull through. Somehow your tiny lungs expel the phlegm, the colour returns to your cheeks, and someone loudly declares it a miracle. Not a metaphorical one, an actual bona fide miracle. A priest might be called to say thanks. You are doused with holy water again just to be safe, and perhaps promised to a saint or two depending on who your mother was praying to during the worst of it. If you ever wondered why so many kids in this era are named after saints, that's why. It's less about piety and more about cosmic insurance. This bout of sickness isn't your last. Over the next few years, you'll become intimately familiar with rashes, boils, coughs, fevers, and at least one case of mysterious swelling that everyone agrees was caused by a passing spirit. The cause of illness is up for debate. Some believe it's bad air, miasmas drifting in through the windows. Others blame sin. That time you laughed at a fart? That might have done it. Still others think it's all tied to the stars. If Mercury is in retrograde and your cow gave sour milk, obviously someone in the house is going to get hives. To distract you from all the bodily horrors, your caretakers occasionally introduce you to medicine toys. These are items thought to protect you from sickness and evil. A carved wooden rabbit to bite on during teething. A small piece of jet worn around your neck. Coral beads, supposedly to strengthen the blood. If you're from a noble family, someone might give you a silver rattle shaped like a cross. If you're poor, your toy is probably just a rock that someone swears kept your uncle alive during a particularly nasty fever in '97. Still, not everything is doom and gloom. On better days, you're carried outside and laid on a blanket or a patch of grass, assuming it's not raining, snowing, or the ground isn't actively steaming from the last time it rained. You blink up at the sky while as geese honk past and villagers shout in the distance. The world smells like wood smoke, cow dung, and damp moss. A chicken waddles by, considers pecking your foot, then changes its mind. You gurgle. You are briefly content. At this point you're starting to move a bit, rolling over, scooting, possibly crawling. This is where parenting shifts from preserve the tiny loaf to don't let the loaf set itself on fire. Open hearths are everywhere, and very few are protected by anything more substantial than a sideways log. Children get burned all the time, some end up with scars, others become cautionary tales told to siblings as warnings. Don't go near the fire or you'll end up like Joffrey's boy with no eyebrows. You begin to explore your environment in the time-honoured toddler tradition of putting absolutely everything in your mouth. Sticks, beetles, bits of leather, or one time a button, someone fishes it out. Later, someone else just shrugs and says, "He'll pass it." You're not expected to be clean or careful. Children in Tudor England are more like durable, muddy accessories to daily life. They bounce around, get smudged with dirt, and occasionally fall into a wash tub, and yet you're still a precious commodity. Even more so if you're a boy, sorry. Boys mean heirs, boys mean labour. Boys are potential soldiers, farmers, clergy, or, if you're really reaching, royal advisors. Girls? Well, girls mean dowries and possible alliances, or at the very least future homemakers who won't shame the family by dying in childbirth. That's the hope, anyway. Every child carries expectations like a tiny ghost backpack, even if they can't walk yet. Your world expands a little every day. You hear conversations about the harvest, the king's latest marriage, the taxes everyone hates. You start to recognise faces. Maybe you have a sibling, just older than you, who hands you things when they're not actively trying to steal your bread. Maybe you have a dog, truffy and questionably loyal. It sometimes growls at shadows and licks your hands, which is just enough comfort to make you giggle. Eventually you reach the holy grail of toddler milestones. Walking. It's not graceful. You stagger like a drunk peasant and fall down constantly, but you move forward and that changes everything. Now you're a roving hazard. Your parents can't just plop you on a rug and pray. You have agency now. You toddle toward open doors, firewood, buckets, the pigsty, and anything else that might kill you. Welcome to independence, Tudor style. Once you're on 2 feet, the expectations start piling on. Even as a very young child, you're expected to help, sort of. Carry a piece of kindling, chase the chickens, stay quiet during prayers. You're not truly useful yet, but the training has begun. There's no such thing as too early when it comes to preparing you for a life of labour, loyalty, and survival. But tonight you're still tiny. You're still bundled up in linen wraps and tucked beside the hearth, with the voices of grown-ups murmuring around you. Someone's making stew, someone else is dozing, a dog curled at their feet. You blink slowly, soothed by the warm crackle of fire, the soft stink of sheep, and the slightly off-key humming of a lullaby passed down through generations of. People who loved their babies the best way they knew how, by keeping them alive. You've graduated from being a wobbling, goose-fat-covered bundle to a full-fledged toddler with opinions, a loud voice, and a growing collection of bruises from running into furniture no one thought to cushion. And the world? It's huge. Mostly made of mud, manure, and sounds you can't make sense of yet, but it's exciting just the same. You start your mornings crawling out of a straw-filled blanket next to the hearth, your hair sticking up like a hedgehog's backside while someone outside is already yelling at the pigs. Tudor England doesn't wait for anyone, especially not sleepy children. If you're lucky enough to live near a patch of grass, or what passes for one in your little village, you spend most of your day outside. Not for your health, really. More because the house is small, cramped, and smells like turnips. Besides, the outdoors is a place where you can burn off all your chaotic toddler energy. You splash in puddles, smear yourself with ash and goose droppings, and chase ducks that absolutely don't want to be chased. Your mother watches from a bench, half proud, half resigned, occasionally hollering something like, "Don't lick that," across the yard. Your outfit is practical, if that's the word we're using. A long linen smock may be a hand-me-down from 3 cousins ago, covered in patches and mysterious stains. It reaches past your knees and gets in the way when you run, which is why you frequently faceplant into the mud. Shoes? Not yet. If you're wearing any foot covering at all, it's a pair of itchy woolen socks tied around your ankles with string. Blisters are normal, splinters constant. You spend a good third of your time with someone picking tiny sticks out of your feet while you howl like a banshee. There aren't toys in the modern sense. No rattling plastic shapes or bright colours designed to stimulate cognitive growth. Instead, your entertainment is whatever you can get your grubby little hands on: sticks, rocks, bits of broken pottery. One of your prized possessions is a sheep's knucklebone, smoothed from use, which you pretend is a horse. Another favourite is a bundle of rags tied to look vaguely like a doll, who smells faintly of bacon and mole. These are your treasures. If you're from a wealthier household, you might have a carved wooden toy or even a spinning top, but the principle remains the same: simple, handmade, slightly dangerous. You also play with other children, mostly those within shouting distance of your home. The games are rough, there are no rules, just vague shared objectives. Run fast, scream louder, don't fall into the well. You race, you wrestle, you invent long, chaotic stories about kings and monsters. Sometimes the games end in laughter. Sometimes they end in bleeding noses. Once, a boy throws a chicken at your head and you're both scolded. Him for animal cruelty, you for provoking him by existing. Your chores are light for now, but not non-existent. You might be sent to pick berries, fetch eggs, or carry kindling. You learn very quickly that you are not the centre of attention anymore, not unless you're bleeding. You're expected to listen, stay out of the way, and to help, even if your version of helping is mostly dropping things, or forgetting where the bucket went. Still, it's part of the rhythm of Tudor childhood. Work first, always work first. Then maybe a crust of bread and a nap in the sun. And the animals, oh the animals. Chickens, pigs, goats, and the occasional mangy cat roam in and out of the house like they pay rent. You form attachments, you name a piglet, you try to ride a goose. You learn quickly and memorably that roosters are territorial and full of rage. Sometimes the animals are warm and soft and safe, other times they are food. One day you'll see your favourite lamb disappear behind the barn and come back as a stew, and that will be your first real existential crisis. Meanwhile, the adults talk about things you only half understand: the harvest, the king, taxes, God, and the neighbour who hasn't been seen since that weird lightning storm last week. You listen with wide eyes, absorbing their tone more than their words. There's a lot of worry in their voices, about food, about health, about the price of grain and whether the local lord has decided to raise rents again. You don't get the details, but you understand that things can change fast and usually not for the better. But at night, things slow down. You come back inside, damp and filthy, and someone, your mother, your sister, maybe a servant if you're noble born, rubs you down with a damp cloth and scrapes the worst of the muck from your hair. You're dressed in a second smock, this one slightly less filthy than the first, and plop down near the fire to eat whatever's in the pot. Pottage again. A thin stew of grains, vegetables, and maybe some meat if someone's pig died. A chicken stopped laying eggs. Tastes bland, but it's warm, and you're too tired to care. After the meal, you curl up near the hearth with the other children, surrounded by straw and the lingering smells of smoke and onions. Someone tells a story, usually an older sibling or a grandmother, with a flair for the dramatic. The tales are strange, full of witches and beasts, knights and saints, girls who become trees, and boys who get cursed for stealing pies. They're cautionary, weird, and sometimes terrifying, but you drink them in like honey. They're your version of cartoons, your nightly escape into something just slightly more magical than your muddy life. As you begin to nod off, the adults finish their chores in low voices. Someone sharpens a knife, someone else mends a sock by candlelight. The fire crackles, embers glowing like tiny red eyes, and the shadows on the wall stretch and dance in a way that makes you feel both safe and uneasy. The dog curls beside you. The cat stalks something unseen. The wind makes the thatch whisper overhead. You are small, slightly sore, mostly full, and profoundly tired. It's been a good day. Historically, this period in your life is one of the few times you're allowed a sliver of freedom. No one expects you to be too useful yet. You're still a little sponge for stories, traditions, and whispered gossip. In a few years, things will change. You'll be expected to grow up fast, maybe even join the workforce before you lose your first tooth. But for now, you're just a child in Tudor England, running wild through hedges, babbling in a muddy accent, clutching a stick that you've declared is a sword. You don't know what's coming, but for now, it doesn't matter. Your speech arrives in scattered bursts, somewhere between a chant and a squawk. You know the basics now, how to ask for bread, how to yell for your mother, how to say no with startling conviction. You've learned a few other useful phrases too. Mine, stop it, and that's a witch. Because even at your age, you're absorbing the fears and phrases that buzz like flies through Tudor life. Language isn't something you're taught gently. It's barked at you, modelled around you, and expected of you, even if your R's still come out like someone pinched your nose. One of the first things you truly master is how to say the proper greeting to the right person. Good morrow, my lord, even if the person you're saying it to looks like they haven't bathed since last harvest. Rank matters here, maybe more than anything else, and using the wrong title could earn your parents a scolding or a fine or worse. You're trained like a tiny dog to say sir or ma'am, to bow your head and to keep your eyes low, especially around anyone wearing a hat nicer than your entire family's wardrobe. And speaking of class, you've already figured out where you stand in the social soup. If you're the child of a land-owning yeoman or gentry, your clothes are made of decent cloth, your food is tolerable, and people generally listen when your father speaks. If you're a labourer's kid or a tenant farmer's scruffy offspring, you understand from the moment you can think that people with softer hands have louder voices. And if you were born inside the echoing walls of a manor house or castle, well, your accent is already different. Less slurred, more Latin-leaning. Even the way you hold a spoon tells people your worth. Yes, even at age 4. By now, you've definitely learned what happens when you step out of line. Punishment is not saved for later. It's swift and usually physical. A slap, a yank by the arm, maybe a quick whack with a wooden spoon or switch. That's the norm, not the exception. Discipline is love, according to Tudor wisdom, and a child left to grow wild is a future criminal. No one's calling child services here. They are the child services. Still, there's laughter too. People do laugh in Tudor England, despite the dampness and frequent outbreaks of disease. You make people laugh when you pronounce words wrong, or when you ask absurd questions about the moon, or when you chase a chicken into someone's skirt and cause a minor scandal. It's a hard life, but even hard lives leave room for joy. And children, no matter their station, are one of the few excuses grown-ups have to soften. To pretend, even briefly, that there's more to life than chores and taxes, and that persistent cough no one wants to talk about. Your days begin to follow a rhythm now. Wake with the rooster, or earlier if someone steps on you in the dark. You help light the fire, or at least try not to knock it over. You might be sent to fetch water, or herbs, or just run and tell someone that the neighbour's sheep has escaped again. Then breakfast, if there is one. Often just ale-soaked bread or a bit of yesterday's pottage scraped from the pot. Then more chores, more play, more shouting about who touched whose stick. If you're a boy, you're encouraged to be boisterous, to throw things, climb trees, yell loudly and show signs that you'll be a strong man someday. If you're a girl, you're taught to help, to hold things, pass things, watch over younger siblings, and practice looking busy. No one says this out loud, of course, it's just how people look at you. Boys are the future of the family name, girls are the future of someone else's, and yet girls still find ways to raise a little chaos. You join in the wrestling matches, you spit over fences, you dare each other to touch the church door at midnight, knowing full well that ghosts live there. You're not yet old enough to be entirely caged in by expectations. That comes later, like a slow tightening of the shoulders. The local priest sometimes visits your home, especially if you're from a respected family, or if he suspects someone's secretly still clinging to Catholicism. His robes smell faintly of mildew and incense, and his voice has that eternal sermon rhythm even when he's just asking for ale. You try to sit still while he talks, but your foot itches, and the dog is snoring in a way that makes you giggle. After he leaves, someone always mutters something about how fat he's gotten. This is also the age when you really start noticing the odd rituals around you. People sprinkle water in doorways, hang dried herbs in windows, and mutter charms under their breath when they pass a black cat. You're taught little rhymes, some for fun, some for survival. There's one about how to tell if bread is cursed, another about spotting fairies in the woods. You don't question these things. You're too young to know which parts are belief and which are just old habits no one has gotten around to questioning. As your vocabulary grows, so does your curiosity. You start asking questions that make the adults glance sideways at each other. What happens when people die? Why do some folks have more meat than us? Why can't girls climb trees on Sunday? The answers are rarely satisfying, but the adults are consistent in their vague sternness. Because that's how it's always been, is the universal Tudor explanation. You hear it often. Sometimes you ask a question and get a story instead. About saints and sinners, kings and martyrs, witches and wild men in the woods. The line between history and fairy tale is razor thin. You hear of Boudica and her flaming chariot, of Saint Edmund with arrows in his chest, of King Arthur who might still be sleeping somewhere under a hill. You believe all of it. Why wouldn't you? Everything around you is already so strange and wild. Mud floors, exploding boils, roosters that fight like drunk uncles. Why shouldn't a dragon live under the village pond? Scholars today debate how much kids in Tudor England were truly children in the modern sense. Were you loved for your innocence or simply prepared early for work and obedience? Some argue children were seen as miniature adults. Others suggest a subtler truth, that children were allowed to be children only in short bursts, when no one was watching too closely. That sweet spot between age 4 and 6, before the demands come crashing down. You're there now, in the last window of your earliest freedom. At the end of each day, you're exhausted in the good way. Not mentally taxed, there's no alphabet to recite yet, but physically, soulfully spent from being alive in a world that requires your full attention. The wind rattles the shutters, your breath smells faintly of onions and dirt. The warmth of the hearth fades slowly into the chill of the dark. You curl beside your siblings, a tangle of limbs and snores, with your rock horse or rag doll tucked under one arm. Someone coughs, a floorboard creaks, you sleep. By now, you're what the village calls old enough to be useful, which means your days of wandering around with a stick pretending to be a knight, or a sheep, depending on your imagination, are officially numbered. There's still time to play, sure, but there's also work. Real work. Maybe you don't carry the whole water bucket yet, but you carry the smaller one. Maybe you don't feed the pigs alone, but you're trusted to poke them toward the trough with a broom. You're expected to keep up, to listen quickly and to stop asking why, unless you want a lecture or a smack. This is also when the shape of your life starts to take clearer form, not because you choose it, but because the world around you is choosing for you. The rules are already written, and they depend mostly on what kind of family you are unlucky or lucky enough to be born into. If you're from a noble household or a wealthy merchant family, your little shoes have buckles, your porridge has spices in it, and your future probably involves reading, property, and someone explaining how not to offend a bishop. If you're from the other 90%, tenant farmers, labourers, small craftsfolk, your feet are calloused, your porridge is mostly boiled oats and regret, and your future involves a lot of bending over. The differences begin to multiply. You can see it in everything, in what you wear, in how people speak to you, in how much you're expected to know. For noble children, this is the beginning of formal etiquette lessons, how to bow, where to place your hands, which fork is for which course, even though you're years away from ever needing a fork. For everyone else, this is the beginning of don't touch that or I'll tan your hide. Use 2 hands on the bucket, and if the pig bites you, it's your own fault. Still, some things are universal. Whether rich or poor, you learn your place at the table. You learn to chew with your mouth closed, or at least to try. You learn not to speak unless spoken to. And you learn, in that slow, dawning way of childhood, that being small does not mean being unseen. Everyone is watching. Your behaviour reflects on your family. A rude child means bad breeding. A noisy child means bad discipline. A disrespectful child means someone's getting shamed at Sunday service. You're not a free agent. You're a very tiny, very muddy ambassador. You start noticing your family's rhythms more too. How your father talks differently when the landlord rides by. How your mother lowers her voice when she mentions certain names, especially the king's. You begin to understand, dimly, that power doesn't just come from swords or titles. It comes from silence, from knowing when to keep your head down. This is the part of growing up in Tudor England that no one names. The gradual awareness that everything, your food, your shelter, your body, is controlled by forces you can't see and probably shouldn't ask about. One thing you do ask about is food, constantly, because you are always hungry. The meals are simple and repetitive, even if you're from a higher status household. Breakfast might be stale bread with ale or milk if there's any left. Dinner, your main meal, is a stew, a pottage, something boiled for hours in a big pot over the fire. It usually contains root vegetables, herbs and bits of meat if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it contains something that used to be meat but now smells faintly of river. Supper is more bread, maybe some cheese, and the quiet knowledge that you'll be just as hungry tomorrow. Wealthier children might have access to slightly more variety. Venison, roast goose, pies stuffed with fish or dried fruits. But even they eat within the limits of the season. No bananas, no chocolate, definitely no pineapples. Your diet depends entirely on what the land gives and what the market doesn't charge too much for. Also, you eat with your hands. Knives are for adults, and even then, they're often shared. If you drop your bread, tough luck. 5-second rules haven't been invented yet, but you'd probably eat it anyway. And what of religion? It's not something you're invited to explore. It's something you're submerged in, like a bucket in a well. You've been told since birth that God is watching always, and he's not particularly impressed with you. You're taught short prayers and longer fears. Fear of hell, fear of sin, fear of speaking the Lord's name with dirty hands. Sundays are for church no matter the weather, no matter your cough, no matter how bad the pigs smelled that morning. You sit still, or try to, on a hard bench, squirming in clothes that pinch, while someone with a booming voice talks about temptation and obedience, and how you should be grateful for everything, especially the fleas. If you're in a Protestant region, and by this point most of England is, you're discouraged from frivolous decorations and saint statues. If you're secretly Catholic, you learn quickly to hide your prayers, to fold your hands in private, and to not tell strangers what you really believe. The Reformation may be a political event to adults, but to you it's mostly about not getting your family burned at the stake. This knowledge sits deep in your stomach, alongside the watery stew. But let's pull back for a moment. You're still a child. You still play when you're allowed to. You run through the village with other children, shrieking like banshees, playing games with names like Hoodman Blind and Barley Break. You play tag, leapfrog, and something that vaguely resembles soccer, though the ball is made of pig bladder and the rules are made up as you go. You steal apples, you dare each other to climb trees or knock on the manor door. One day, you and 2 others hide in a cart just to see where it goes. Dumps you in a ditch 3 fields over. You are scolded with righteous fury. It was worth it. In the fields, you chase birds and throw rocks and find skulls, animal, probably, and pretend they're treasures. You sing songs that sound older than the hills. You copy the adults without really understanding them, mimicking their curses, their gestures, their sighs. You start to see yourself reflected in the world, in the tools you're handed, the chores you're trusted with, the words you're praised for or punished for saying. You're becoming something. A boy, a girl, a worker, a future something shaped by every muddy hour. Historians sometimes argue about the agency of children in this period. Did you have choices? Did you dream? Or were you simply trained like livestock to survive, breed, and obey? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Even in a world of rigid class and survival-based parenting, you still had moments of laughter, of wonder, of stubborn rebellion. You still squinted at the stars and asked questions no one could answer. You still kicked a stone just to watch it bounce. You still whispered things to yourself when no one was listening. Night falls again. You sit by the fire, the same as always. Your hands crusted with dirt, your hair full of straw. You've done your part today, hauling, ditching, listening. You've been good, mostly. Someone hands you a bit of hard cheese. It squeaks between your teeth. You don't care. It's food. The fire the shadows deepen. The same old lullaby drifts through the air, sung in a voice that's grown hoarse from years of singing. You curl up and sleep like someone who knows tomorrow will be the same, and that's not such a bad thing. Your hands are tougher now, scratched, dirty, and surprisingly capable. Somewhere along the way, your fingers learned how to grip things with a strength that didn't exist just a year ago. You're still a child, but you can carry water, sort beans, chase goats that don't want to be chased, and scrub a pot until it shines like pewter, even though it's just blackened clay. You've entered that odd middle ground where you're not old enough to be taken seriously, but definitely old enough to be blamed when something goes wrong. Especially if it involves the chickens, or anything that breaks. Play is still part of your life, but it's wilder now, more physical. No more gentle toddling around the yard. Now it's full-speed sprints through cow dung, wrestling matches that end in nosebleeds, and secret forts built behind hay bales with stolen planks and a lot of hope. You and your friends have invented a game involving wooden sticks and imaginary knights. Though the line between pretend and accidental violence is extremely blurry, someone gets thwacked in the eye almost daily. It's fine. If no one cries blood, it doesn't count. You also start collecting things. Odd little objects that make sense only to you. A twisted feather. A piece of glass smoothed by the river. A sheep's tooth you're convinced belonged to a dragon. You keep them in a pouch or hide them in a hollow tree. They're more than treasures. They're proof that you exist beyond chores and scoldings. Little tokens of your private world. No one tells you to do this, it just feels important. Your sense of humour is evolving too, and by evolving, I mean it's mostly farts. Farts are hilarious, always, every single time. You and your friends invent elaborate fake noble accents just to say ridiculous things like, "Pardon me, kind sir, I believe thou hath broken wind." Adults hate it. That makes it funnier. You giggle so hard once you fall backward into a puddle and almost ruin your only shirt. Worth it. Toys are still minimal, but now you make your own. You carve a stick into the shape of a sword or a spoon depending on the day. You tie scraps of fabric around pebbles and call them doll folk. If your parents are in a good mood, you might be allowed to play with a spinning top someone older carved long ago. It's chipped and unbalanced, but it still works, wobbling across the dirt floor like a drunk beetle. If you're a boy, someone has probably started showing you how to use a small tool. Maybe a knife for whittling or a tiny hammer to pound bent nails into firewood. Not to be useful yet, just to learn. If you're a girl, you're likely learning how to sew. Not elaborate embroidery, but the kind of stitching that keeps socks from falling apart and shirts from unravelling after a dozen wears. Your fingers bleed. You're told not to flinch. And let's talk about gender roles because they're not subtle. Boys are allowed to roughhouse. They're expected to get dirty, loud and vaguely aggressive. Girls are expected to be tidy, quiet and helpful. If a girl acts boyish, people comment, laugh or tisk disapprovingly. If a boy acts girlish, people stop laughing. It's not cruel exactly, it's just the way things are. You learn early where the boundaries lie, even if you don't understand why they're there. Still, you push back in your own ways. You sneak off with your brother's boots. You refuse to curtsy to the visiting reeve because he smells like cheese and arrogance. You hide your sewing and chase the geese instead. These rebellions are small, almost invisible to the adults, but they matter. They're the beginning of you asking who you are and how much of that you get to choose. Then there's the violence, not the fun, chicken-chasing kind, the real kind. It's everywhere. Fights between men in the street, whippings in the village square, the vague threat of stocks or pillories for minor offences. You see people punished publicly and without ceremony. A man lashed for stealing bread. A woman paraded through town with a sign around her neck reading "Scold," which sounds silly until you see her face red with shame and dried tears. This leaves an impression. There's no question what happens when you step out of line. One of your friends brags that his older brother saw someone hanged. You pretend to be fascinated. But it haunts you later that night. The rope, the silence, the awful stillness. You don't talk about it, but it plants itself in your mind like a seed. Death isn't hidden here. It's a neighbour, a frequent visitor, something you're already expected to accept with a kind of shrugging reverence. Meanwhile, your understanding of the natural world deepens. You know when the berries ripen. You know which mushrooms will make your stomach hurt and which ones will make your aunt start seeing angels. You watch birds, insects, the colour of the sky. You've been alive long enough to notice patterns, signs of coming rain, the way animals act before a frost. No one teaches you these things formally. You learn by watching, copying and failing. There's a quiet magic to it all too. You believe in fairies, of course. Who doesn't? Everyone knows not to linger by the woods at dusk or leave out bread at night for the little folk, or sing after sunset unless you want to be lured away. You don't know if you believe the stories, but you definitely don't want to test them. Better to follow the rules and sleep in your own bed, even if your bed is a sack of straw and the cat won't get off your feet. Your parents, or whoever's raising you, are proud of you in that gruff, understated Tudor way. They notice when you don't break the bowl, when you remember to keep the door latched, when you don't forget the bundle of kindling they sent you to fetch 2 hours ago. They may not say "I love you" out loud, but when they set aside the better piece of bread for you, or pull you away from the fire before you lean in too close, that's their version. You understand this, even if you don't have the words for it. Some scholars argue that Tudor children were seen mostly as future workers, commodities rather than individuals. Others push back, pointing to letters and wills where children are mentioned tenderly, even mourned with aching sorrow. The truth, as always, is messy. You're loved, but also expected to grow up fast. Your sweetness is real, but your usefulness is expected. Childhood isn't a protected space, it's just the first act. And tonight you fall asleep with sore feet and dirt under your nails. The fire's dying, someone's snoring. The floor creaks as your mother paces quietly, checking the door, checking the baby, checking the sky. You dream of the woods, the fairies, and the stick sword you lost in the stream last week. You're not sure what tomorrow brings, but you know it will involve mud, noise, chores, and hopefully not being blamed for the pig escaping again. You know prayers before you know your own birthday. That's how it works here. Your first full sentence might have been the Lord's Prayer, muttered sleepily before bed under the smoky rafters, or a stammered Ave Maria if your family leans Catholic, quietly, cautiously, in this time when religion could get you fined, exiled, or chopped in half. You're not sure which parts of the words you understand and which are just sounds, but that hardly matters. Everyone around you agrees. Say the words, cross yourself the right way, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be spared the devil's interest tonight. Evenings are when the fear settles deepest. Not just the dark, which is a living thing all its own, creeping into the corners of the house like spilled ink, but the things that might come with it. Spirits, demons, dead relatives with unfinished business. The wild hunt. And yes, fairies. You've heard all about them. The good folk, the hidden ones, the ones who snatch children who don't sleep, or who forget to say their prayers, or who step in a fairy ring without asking permission. The line between bedtime story and local lore is razor thin. Your grandmother, if she's still alive, which isn't guaranteed, knows 1,000 stories. Some are biblical, others are strange and dreamlike, full of talking animals and saints who turn into trees. She tells them in a voice like wood smoke, her eyes half closed, her hands busy with mending or chewing dried roots. You don't understand all the meanings, but you remember the rhythms. You remember the feel of her calloused fingers tapping your forehead gently when a story ends. That, somehow, keeps the night at bay. You're expected to fear sin as much as sickness, maybe more. You're told that God sees everything, which is deeply unsettling when you've just stolen a plum or pushed your brother into a puddle. The concept of forgiveness is there, technically, but it's buried beneath layers of shame, guilt, and a constant reminder that your body is a vessel of temptation. Your soul, apparently, is always one bad decision away from hellfire. No pressure. Firelight is your version of electricity. Every evening, your world shrinks down to the circle of warmth around the hearth. Shadows dance on the walls, stretching long and skeletal. Someone's always poking the logs, trying to keep the flame going just a bit longer, because once it dies, so does your evening. Candles are rare and expensive. Oil lamps smell funny and don't last long. When the fire's gone, the day is truly over. No bonus round. No, just 5 more minutes. The sounds at night are something you grow up with, but never quite get used to. Creaking wood, wind in the thatch, animals shifting, coughing from another pallet in the corner. The house is never truly silent. There's always something whispering. You tell yourself it's just the wind, even though you're half certain you heard your name once, spoken in a voice too soft to belong to anyone human. Sleep arrangements are communal. No private bedrooms, unless you're absurdly rich, which you probably aren't. You sleep in a pile of siblings, cousins, or servants, depending on your household. You share blankets, warmth, and lice. Occasionally you get kicked in the ribs by someone mid-dream. Sometimes someone wets the bed. No one says anything. It happens. Just throw another layer of straw over it and try to fall back asleep before your foot freezes. And then there are nights when someone dies. Death in Tudor England isn't hidden behind curtains and antiseptic corridors. It happens in your home, usually near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket that still smells like mutton stew. You've seen it at least once already. An aunt, a baby, a neighbour who got a deep cut and just didn't wake up. When someone is dying, the house goes still. The grown-ups whisper. A priest or a parson might be called, but often there's only time for a quick prayer and a final wet breath. After that, silence, except for the sobbing or the quiet shuffle of feet as the body is covered. The dead don't disappear instantly. The body stays in the house, sometimes overnight. You're told not to touch it. You're told to pray. You watch from your blanket, staring into the fire while a shape that used to be someone rests in the same room. This isn't terrifying, not exactly. It's just part of life. Part of the circle everyone talks about, but no one explains. People are born, people work, people die. Try not to catch whatever they had. Your parents tell you the soul has gone on, to heaven, to purgatory, to the fairies, depending on their mood and religious leanings. Some believe the soul lingers for 3 days, some believe it travels immediately. Others just tell you not to ask questions and to keep your mouth shut around the priest. You obey, because you're starting to understand that beliefs are like flint and straw, useful when handled properly, but dangerous if sparked at the wrong time. Despite the gloom, faith is comfort. It's one of the few reliable things in your world. You cross yourself when passing the chapel, you mutter short prayers before meals, you clutch your wooden rosary beads or finger the ragged little cloth scrap that your aunt swears was blessed by St. Cuthbert. You can't read, not yet, but you know how to repeat things in Latin. You like the feel of it in your mouth, mysterious, heavy, a language that feels older than dirt. And there's music too. You don't think of it as music, not formally, but there's singing in the house, soft tuneless murmurs while stirring pots, lullabies with 4 verses about death and sin, hymns learned by ear passed down like sourdough. One of your older siblings hums constantly. You hum back. Sometimes you invent little songs about the dog or the pig or the way your uncle smells after drinking. No one stops you. Music is the one thing no one can afford, and yet everyone has. Outside the window, the moon glows through the smoke-streaked glass, milky and distant. You're told the moon controls madness, that staring at it too long can bring fever or wild dreams. You stare anyway. It's not rebellion exactly, just curiosity. You wonder if the stars look the same from other villages. You wonder if the fairies live up there, or if they just fly over sometimes, watching the fields and pointing at your muddy hair. You fall asleep mid-thought, curled between 2 warm bodies, the fire down to a red whisper. Your dreams are strange and vivid, faces from the day, stories from your grandmother's mouth, shapes that aren't quite animals and aren't quite people. You don't remember them when you wake, just a lingering sense that the world is bigger than your house and smaller than your fears. You're older now, not old exactly, but old enough to notice that things around you smell worse than they used to. Maybe it's your growing sense of self-awareness, or maybe it's just that summer is here and the meat is going off faster. Either way, you've started to register that everything in your home, your clothes, your food, the dog and your uncle, has a particular scent, and it's not great. Your family lives with it, bathes rarely, and sprinkles dried lavender into corners like that'll fix anything. It doesn't. But you don't complain because no one complains. Complaining is for noble ladies who have run out of saffron. Your house still looks the same, wooden walls daubed with mud, low ceilings, and a floor made of packed earth that occasionally grows something green, if no one sweeps for a week. There's the main room with the hearth, a small loft where the older ones sleep, and a narrow corner space curtained off for your parents, though privacy is more symbolic than real. Your family is large, maybe not in the 14 children sense, but big enough that someone's always yelling, someone's always asleep, and someone's always blaming you for something they did. At this age, you begin to understand the social stew bubbling inside your home. There are siblings, obviously, but also servants or boarders depending on your class. If you're poor, servants might just mean that cousin who sleeps on the bench and helps with the goats. If you're wealthier, you've got an actual hierarchy going on. Nursemaids, wet nurses, tutors, cooks, and a steward who walks like he's permanently offended by your existence. You might have siblings close in age or spread out like ladder rungs. And while there's affection, there's also competition, especially when food is thin or chores are many. One day, your sister hides the heel of bread under her cloak because she knows you'll snatch it if she blinks. Another time, your older brother pins you to the dirt floor for using his spoon. He gets scolded. You get your breath back. That's family in Tudor England. Messy, loud, loving in a way that's more like an elbow in the ribs than a hug. Everyone knows their place, even if they're constantly trying to step out of it when no one's looking. Meals are a shared affair, which means no secrets and no escape. You sit where you're told, speak only if spoken to, and eat fast because no one's going to save the last bit of turnip for you out of kindness. There's one pot, maybe 2, and everyone eats from it. You use your hands or a shared wooden spoon, maybe a trencher, a flat slab of stale bread acting as your plate. At the end of the meal, someone soaks the bread with gravy or broth and eats it, crust and all. The nobility have actual plates made of pewter or wood. You have edible dishware and a growing sense of fairness. Whoever's fastest eats best. Your home is full of movement and sound, chickens pecking at the threshold, your baby brother screaming, the dog barking at shadows again. There's no such thing as silence unless someone's died, or everyone's too tired to speak. Most conversations are practical. Who fetched the water? Where's the knife? What's burning? Occasionally there's gossip, which is the closest thing you get to news. And someone saw a stranger in the village, and someone's cousin married a girl who speaks French. Someone else has boils. No one says it outright, but you all know that boils are bad news. It's the kind of thing that gets people put aside. And then there's the meat. It sits on the edge of the table, sweating in the heat. It's not what you'd call fresh. Most meat in Tudor homes is salted, dried, smoked, or just vaguely unpleasant. You eat it anyway. Flies buzz around, you wave them off, chew quickly, and hope your stomach doesn't revolt. Occasionally someone finds a worm. It's a moment of both horror and dark triumph. Someone laughs, someone retches. You get used to it. Eventually, you stop noticing altogether. That's how survival works. Your sense of personal space is microscopic. You share everything. Beds, food, spoons, secrets, chores, blame. Someone always smells like sweat and someone else is always sick. There's not much you can do about it. The idea of hygiene as we know it doesn't exist. People wash their hands when they remember, or when someone's watching. You might bathe once a week if the weather's nice and there's time. More often you just rinse your face with cold water and call it good enough. There's a bucket in the corner that no one talks about. You know what it's for, you avoid it like it owes you money. Privies exist, but they're often outdoors, damp, dark and terrifying. Some are nothing more than a hole in a wooden plank hanging over a pit. You hold it in until you can't. When you go outside, you take a stick, just in case something's already in the hole. The kitchen, if you have one, is not a separate room. It's part of the main living area. The hearth is always burning and someone's always stirring a pot. You help when asked, chopping roots, fetching water, turning the spit. If you're trusted, you're allowed to stir. If you're not, you're told to stand back and not breathe too loudly. Meals take hours to prepare and minutes to vanish. You try to remember not to burn your tongue. You almost always fail. Quirky fact? Well, here you go. It's not unusual for people to store bacon from the rafters, literally hanging above your head. A side of pork preserved with salt tied to a beam. If you're lucky, it drips only a little. If you're unlucky, it falls in the middle of dinner. That's considered a blessing, or at least a meal. Either way, someone says, God be praised, and someone else goes looking for a clean knife. Now, let's not ignore the rodents. Rats, mice, the occasional weasel. They live here too. You share your home with them whether you want to or not. They scuttle behind barrels, chew at crumbs, and sometimes just stare at you from the rafters like they're waiting for you to mess up. You've learned to stomp loudly when you enter a room. Not to scare them necessarily, but to signal that this particular stretch of dirt is currently yours. Debate still exists among historians about how affectionate Tudor families were. Did they love each other as we understand it? Or was love more transactional, measured in food portions and wool blankets? The truth is likely both. You're not cuddled or told you're special, but when you're sick, your mother sings to you. When you fall, your sister checks your knees. When you cry, rarely, and only at night, your father tells you to stop, but he doesn't say it cruelly. Just like someone who wants you to be strong. You sleep the way you live, close to others, cramped, itchy, and somehow content. Someone snores, someone mumbles in their sleep. The embers glow low, and the air smells like smoke and stew and people. Always people. This is your home. Noisy, messy, smelly. But it's yours, and you know every sound it makes. You're going to school, or maybe not. It depends on who you are, where you live, and whether anyone in your family thinks it's worth the trouble. For a lot of Tudor children, education is a luxury, not a given. If your family's poor, and most families are, then odds are you've already been educated in the essential life skills. How to carry water without spilling it, how to keep your mouth shut when grown-ups are talking, and how to avoid eye contact with the reeve. But now you're around 6 or 7, and people start asking the big question. Should you learn your letters, or should you learn to shear sheep? Let's say your family decides to send you. Not for glory or ambition, but because the village parson keeps giving your father pointed looks, and your mother secretly hopes you'll learn to write her name someday. That's a big deal. So, one damp morning you're bundled into your best, least-stained smock and marched toward the schoolhouse, which is probably a room in the church, or someone's drafty side room with holes in the thatch and a smell that suggests onions and old socks. The teacher is not the kindly, chalk-dusted figure of modern fantasy. He's probably a clergyman, a literate man who learned Latin before he learned how to smile. His robes are patched, his shoes squeak when he walks, and he wields a switch made of hazelwood that he claims can knock the devil out of lazy heads. He doesn't smile at you, he just points to a bench and tells you to sit still, or else you do because fear is very motivating. Your schoolmates are a motley crew, boys mostly, a few girls if their families are progressive or pious or both. The classroom is cold. There's no stove. Your breath fogs in front of you, and you're trying not to shiver too obviously because someone might call you soft. Lessons begin with prayer, of course, then a chant of the alphabet. You repeat letters over and over until they no longer sound like anything, then Latin, more Latin, all Latin. Half the words are biblical, the other half come from old Roman texts and books about war, law, and dying with dignity. None of them are useful if you just wanted to be a Thatcher. Quills are rare, ink is expensive, and you scratch your letters onto a wax tablet with a stylus, wiping it clean when you need more space. Parchment is for advanced students or rich ones. You envy the boy next to you, whose father is a merchant, and whose tablet doesn't have a crack through the middle. You vow to swap with him when he's not looking. You won't. But the thought keeps you warm for 10 minutes. The room smells like unwashed feet and ambition. There are a few books, just a Bible, a hornbook with the alphabet printed on a parchment square, and maybe a primer bound in leather so dried it crunches when opened. The teacher reads aloud and you try to follow. If you fidget, he raps your knuckles. If you speak out of turn, he makes you kneel on peas. If you forget a prayer, he sends you home with a red ear and a note that you cannot read. You don't know what it says, but your father does. You hear him shout before you even reach the door. Despite the misery, something inside you starts to spark. The rhythm of letters, the shape of words, they begin to make sense. You learn your own name, then your father's, then the phrase, in principio erat verbum. In the beginning was the word. It's hard not to be impressed by that. You trace the letters in the dirt outside the chapel and feel like a magician. A very cold, very hungry magician, but a magician all the same. Meanwhile, your chores don't stop. If you go to school, you still have to bring in firewood before breakfast and turn the spit at supper. If your family's poor, you're pulled from lessons during planting or harvest time. If the cow is sick or the well freezes or someone breaks their leg, guess who gets to skip Latin and help instead? Education isn't the priority, it's the garnish. Life still comes first. You begin to envy children who don't go to school at all. They don't get hit with the switches, they don't chant vowels until their throats hurt. They just work and sleep and occasionally hit things with sticks for fun. For girls, school is even more precarious. Some attend early lessons, but many don't. They're educated at home, if at all, taught by their mothers or older sisters how to spin, stitch, keep accounts, and prepare for marriage. Latin is optional, bread making is mandatory. A clever girl might learn to read if someone lends her a psalter, or if the local priest takes interest in her soul. But more often, her education is domestic, focused on managing a household, obeying quietly, and knowing how to bind a poultice for when your husband falls off a ladder. One quirk of Tudor school life is the holiday schedule. You get days off not because anyone thinks you need rest, but because holy days demand it. Saint days, feast days, and major church celebrations mean school's out. Children from wealthier homes might also be pulled out for travel or entertainment, though entertainment usually means watching a bear get baited, or listening to minstrels drone on about chivalry while eating salted figs. You'd rather have the day off. At home, your parents are proud, though they pretend not to be. Your mother asks you to read a prayer aloud. You stumble over the words and she nods. That's the whole exchange. No applause, just a nod. Your father grunts in approval and tells you to mend the gate latch. You do. You feel a little taller afterward. Scholars today debate just how widespread Tudor education really was. Some argue literacy rates were shockingly low. Others believe they were higher than we assume, at least among boys. What we know for sure is that schooling was inconsistent, brutal, and more about discipline and doctrine than discovery. And yet children learned. You learn. Because even when you hate it, even when you wish you were out climbing trees or chasing ducks, there's something intoxicating about unlocking the written world. Night falls, your hands are sore from writing, your knees bruised from kneeling. You sit near the fire, repeating the Latin alphabet under your breath like a prayer. Or a spell. Your sister yawns beside you. Your brother burps dramatically. The room settles into warmth and shadows. Tomorrow you'll be back at that cold bench reciting psalms until your jaw aches. But for now you bask in the glow of learning. still unsure what it's for, but feeling somehow that it matters. You're a few years older now, and though your face is still round and your knees are still constantly scraped, your world has started to divide more clearly into two categories: what you're allowed to do and what you're expected to become. And the split is sharpest when you look at the lives of boys versus girls. From the moment you wake to the moment the fire burns low, your days are now shaped as much by your gender as they are by your family's name. No one explains this out loud, they don't need to. You just look around and see the pattern. If you're a boy, you're told to stand straight, to speak clearly when spoken to, and to stop fidgeting with your boots. You're expected to be strong, not later. But now, you're shown how to tie knots, sharpen tools, carry bundles without dropping them, and keep your mouth shut when your father is talking to the landlord. You're meant to be learning how to work, how to fight if needed, and how to live without relying too much on anyone else. You're not told it, but you're being trained to lead, to inherit, to defend. You may not understand it yet, but someone is already thinking about what kind of man you'll become, and how useful you'll be when that time comes. And if you're a girl, your future is being stitched together one careful lesson at a time. You're taught how to keep a fire burning just right, not too hot, not too smoke. You learn how to stretch a bit of fat into a whole pot of pottage, how to make wool less scratchy, and how to keep a baby calm while also sewing with one hand. You're not playing with dolls anymore. You're making dolls for your younger siblings, while also learning how to clean up after them, dress them, and rock them to sleep without waking anyone else. And every adult in your life is quietly but persistently preparing you for a home that won't be your own. The future, if you're a girl, is marriage, full stop. No footnote, no asterisk. If you're lucky, it'll be someone close to your age. If you're less lucky, it'll be someone whose teeth are older than your father's. The match will be made based on land, name, dowry, or family need. Maybe you've already heard whispers about a suitable lad in a nearby village. Maybe your aunt was married off at 14 and hasn't been home since. Everyone acts like this is normal. Because it is. You start hearing different things depending on who you are. Boys hear stories about knights, about battles, about glorious deaths and noble victories. Girls hear stories about virtuous wives, clever maids, tragic queen tours who stayed loyal even when their husbands were monsters. You're both told stories about saints, of course, many of whom were tortured or beheaded or roasted alive, but the message is always gendered. Boys are told to be brave, girls are told to be obedient. Both are told to fear sin like it's contagious. If you're a boy, your education might continue, more Latin, more writing, perhaps some arithmetic if your family deals in trade. If you're a girl, you're probably being pulled more into domestic training now. Sewing samplers, brewing herbs, managing a household without actually managing anything. You know what dried nettle does for a headache. You know how to pluck a chicken in under 10 minutes. You know how to sit quietly during a conversation, looking alert but never interrupting. You're told this is what makes a good wife. And yet, there are slivers of freedom. There's the girl down the lane who climbs trees and runs barefoot through the fields. There's the boy who loves to sketch birds in the dirt rather than chop wood. These small rebellions exist. People talk about them, sometimes with affection, sometimes with concern. You're allowed a few quirks, as long as you eventually fall into line, because soon you won't be a child anymore, and everyone is watching to see what you're becoming. Clothing is a visible marker of change too. Boys start to wear breeches instead of long tunics. It's a big moment, awkward, itchy, but important. It says, I'm not a baby anymore. Girls start to wear gowns that reach the floor, bodices laced tighter each year, hair pulled back and braided. It's not just about appearance, it's about posture, modesty, self-control. Every thread is a lesson in restraint. Some days, it feels like the world is pressing in from every angle, not cruelly, but insistently, like the hands of a sculptor shaping you into something specific. Not what you want to be, necessarily, but what's expected. You go along with it because that's what children do, but deep down there's a part of you, small, stubborn, that wonders why things have to be this way. Why your brother gets to learn sword drills while you learn to keep a stew from boiling over. Why your sister has to marry someone she doesn't like. Why your parents look so tired all the time. Still, you're not without pride. You take it in the things you can do, the stitches you sew straight, the logs you chop cleanly, the eggs you collect without breaking any. Someone notices. Maybe your mother pats your shoulder. Maybe your father nods and grunts something that passes for praise. It matters more than you'd admit. Among scholars, there's some debate about how strictly these gender roles were enforced. Some evidence suggests flexibility, daughters working fields, sons cooking stews. But for most, the divide was clear and lasting, and it wasn't just social, it was spiritual. A girl who disobeyed her father was a danger to her soul. A boy who shirked his duty was failing God's plan. That kind of belief doesn't leave much room for negotiation. Still, childhood doesn't vanish all at once. You still find time to laugh, to sneak off and pick berries, to roll down a hill and rip your gown. You're scolded for it, of course. But you do it anyway. Because deep down, you know this freedom won't last forever. The rules are coming, stricter, louder, heavier. But for now, you've got one more summer of bare feet and laughter, before everything gets more complicated. Night falls again. You lie by the fire, gown loosened or boots kicked off, sore from a day of helping, learning, pretending. You close your eyes to the crackle of flames and the whisper of someone praying nearby. The air smells of wool and wood smoke. You dream, maybe, of running through fields, into woods, towards something that doesn't yet have a name. Your world now stretches past the cottage door. Not far, but far enough. You're no longer confined to just the yard or the lane out front. You're sent to the edge of the fields, down to the stream, across the village green, and occasionally, if someone's brave or desperate enough, to the edge of the forest. That sense of space, of freedom, is intoxicating. You don't have much, but what you do have is the entire outdoors, muddy, wild, and buzzing with life. It's the Tudor version of after-school fun, except you still have chores before and after. Always chores. Boredom is the background music of your life. Not the comfortable, scrolling through your phone kind, but the heavy, gnawing, mid-afternoon kind, where time feels sticky and endless. There's no entertainment waiting for you, no books to flip through for fun, no games that come in boxes. You invent things, games of chase, mud-clod fights, rock stacking, catch the toad. You climb trees you're not supposed to, poke beehives you definitely shouldn't, and crawl through hedges because you heard something strange on the other side. Your imagination is your most dangerous tool, and your best friend. A stick becomes a sword. A rotten log becomes a fortress. A mound of hay is a sleeping dragon. You whisper stories to yourself while walking to fetch water, narrating your adventures like a travelling bard. Your friends join in too, and the lines between real and pretend blur in ways only kids can truly master. You leap over puddles like they're moats. You hold pretend trials for imaginary crimes. You stage elaborate rescues of turnips that were never really in danger. Nature is your playground and also your danger zone. You've learnt the difference between a friendly bee and an angry one. You know which plants leave a rash. You've developed a healthy fear of stinging nettles, brambles, and that one cow in the south pasture that seems personally offended by your existence. You know when the clouds look like rain and when they look like real trouble. When the wind shifts and the sky turns greenish, someone always mutters, "Storm's coming, and you're told to head back. You never argue. Lightning's not something you mess with. The animals are their own world entirely. The village dogs run in semi-wild packs, snarling and begging scraps in equal measure. The cats are aloof and possibly witches in disguise, depending on which neighbour you ask. You've befriended a goose, regretted it, and now avoid eye contact whenever it hisses. You talk to the pigs, they talk back. You pretend the chickens are your royal subjects, you give them titles. Lord Pecker, Lady Featherbottom. One of them lays double yolk eggs, and you've decided that's a sign of divine favour. Occasionally you fish, if that's even the right word. It's more like stand in a muddy creek holding a stick and hoping something suicidal swims by. You rarely catch anything. When you do, it's celebrated with appropriate screaming and flailing and someone inevitably falling in. You come home soaked, shivering and triumphant, holding a fish the size of a carrot like it's a prize from a royal tournament. Your mother shakes her head but makes space in the pot anyway. Seasons define everything. In spring the world explodes into colour and mud. Flowers bloom, lambs appear, and everyone gets nervous about the weather turning too cold again. Summer is when you run wild, half-dressed, covered in bites, dirt and bruises, but alive in a way that makes you feel invincible. Autumn means work, real work. Harvest time is everyone's time, even the kids. You're up early, bending over rows of crops, blisters forming, shoulders aching. It's hard, but the meals are better. Someone always finds apples. There's music sometimes, fiddles and flutes and clapping hands. You fall asleep during those nights with straw in your hair and satisfaction in your bones. Then winter comes, and the outdoors becomes a different beast. Short days, long nights, frost that creeps into your toes before you've even left the doorstep. Snow is rare, but when it falls, it's magical briefly. You throw it, eat it, roll and awe it. Then you realise how cold it makes everything and long for the fire like it's the only thing keeping you tethered to the earth. You slip on ice, fall into ditches, and learn the hard way that wet wool does not dry quickly. But there's also silence in winter. A hush. A frozen stillness that turns the world into something you almost believe is holy. Even in the middle of all this freedom, you're watched. Adults don't hover, but they know where you are. If you stray too far or vanish too long, someone comes looking. Not always gently. You're not allowed into the deep woods, not yet. Too many stories about disappearances, wild beasts and fair folk who take children away if they wander too far without a charm or a prayer. You know these are stories, mostly, but you stay out anyway, just in case. You're not the only one learning from nature. The older women gather herbs, mugwort, comfrey, yarrow, plants with names that sound like spells. Some are for healing, others are for other things. You're told not to touch the dried bundles hanging from the rafters. You do once. Your hand itches for a week. Lesson learned. Maybe the plants are cursed, maybe it's just bad luck. Tudor logic doesn't require much distinction between the two. Fringe fact? Here's one. Nettle stings were sometimes used as a treatment for arthritis. That's right. People literally whipped themselves with stinging plants to relieve pain. You hear that from your aunt, who tried it once and then spent 2 days with welts on her arms and a suspicious grin. Medicine and mayhem are awfully close cousins in this world. There's still debate among historians about how much free play Tudor children actually had. Some say the work left little time for fun. Others argue children carved out joy wherever they could. And watching yourself and your friends in action, mud-caked, sunburned, roaring with laughter as you chase an invisible beast through the fields. It's hard to imagine any official record capturing that. Your joy isn't written down, but it's real. It's in the bruises, in the wild stories you invent, in the way your voice cracks from yelling too much at nothing in particular. Nightfall, again. You drag yourself inside, wet, tired and utterly satisfied. Your boots are heavy with mud. Your hair smells of smoke and grass. You eat with both hands, cheeks puffed out like a squirrel, and fall asleep before your father finishes his second sentence about next week's chores. The wind whistles outside, the moon rises over the village, you dream of trees that walk and rivers that whisper secrets. Tomorrow the world will be waiting again, and you'll run straight into it. You've learned how to stay quiet when it matters, not because you're naturally meek, hardly, but because Tudor England is not particularly forgiving toward loudmouths, especially young ones. The older you get, the more you understand that words have weight here. Too many said too fast or to the wrong person, and you'll be tasting that weight on your tongue for the rest of the day. Especially if you're a girl. Girls who talk too much get talked about, and not in the fun gossiping way. Punishment is a constant shadowing every part of your childhood like smoke from the hearth. It comes quick, hard, and often publicly. Discipline is part of the culture, baked in like rye flour in a stale loaf. Everyone believes it's necessary, that it shapes you into something worthwhile. The rod, the strap, the wooden spoon, each has its place in the family hierarchy. And sometimes when the offence is bigger than just breaking a jug or forgetting a chore, the punishment doesn't stay inside your home. If you're unlucky, or simply loud in the wrong place, you may find yourself hauled before the entire village for what amounts to misbehaviour. It's not always as dramatic as a trial, but the humiliation hits harder when it's served with a side of public performance. A child who talks back too often, or curses, or, God forbid, steals, might be shoved into the stocks for an afternoon, just long enough for your legs to go numb and your pride to start peeling off like old bark. There's also the scold's bridle, something you've only seen once, but it was enough. It's a metal cage that fits around the head and includes a little tongue press to stop the wearer from speaking. Technically, it's used for adults, usually women, who talk too much or cause disruption. But the image sticks with you. That cold, rusted thing strapped to someone's head like a punishment for being opinionated. You don't forget it, and when your mother shoots you that look during supper, you suddenly remember to chew with your mouth closed and keep your thoughts to yourself. If you're a boy, you get hit. That's just how it works. You speak out of turn, you get cuffed. You disobey your father, you get the strap. The village schoolmaster, if you have one, swings his switch with impressive flair as though he's rehearsed it. Kneel on dried peas? Sure. Hold a brick over your head for an hour? Why not? Pain is part of your education. It's character building, they say. Helps the soul. The body, meanwhile, is just collateral. For girls, the punishments can be less physical but more psychologically brutal. You're expected to be quiet, compliant, modest, and endlessly helpful. Step out of line and it's shame you get. A slow, deliberate social punishment. You're publicly compared to better behaved girls. You're blamed when boys act out. You're mocked, pitied, or ignored, depending on the mood of the adults around you. Sometimes your hair is cut as a lesson. Sometimes you're isolated, told to eat separately, sleep separately. The worst part? No one raises their voice. Just that cold, disappointed silence that freezes your chest worse than any slap ever could. Children police each other, too. If someone gets caught doing something foolish, stealing a turnip, kissing behind the stable, mimicking the parish priest during services, it spreads like fire on dry straw. You'll laugh, mock, imitate, until it happens to you. Then it's not funny anymore. You realise quickly that shame is contagious, that your place among your peers can rise or fall in the time it takes to trip over your own feet during a maypole dance. And the church? Oh, the church is watching. Always. Morality isn't a private affair here, it's a matter of public record. If you're caught lying, if you swear, if you miss Sunday service, for anything less than actual death, you might end up confessing before the congregation. Standing red-faced before a crowd of frowning neighbours while the priest drones about temptation and divine judgment. You don't even know what you did wrong half the time. Maybe you said something careless, maybe someone misheard, maybe you just looked too cheerful during Lent. But here's the twist. You still rebel, quietly mostly, but it's there, that persistent itch to resist. You say things under your breath, you whisper jokes in Latin that your teacher doesn't catch, you steal moments, tiny ones, to feel free. You sneak a bite of fruit from the orchard, you pretend to be asleep during prayers, you practice saying bad words under your breath, seeing how they taste in your mouth like sour apples. You do not get away with much, but what you do get away with makes everything else bearable. You notice some adults bend the rules too. That man who drinks more than he tithes, that woman who gossips all day and sings bawdy songs when she thinks no one's listening, the blacksmith's son who claims he saw a devil in the fields but still plays dice behind the chapel. You realise slowly that the rules aren't evenly enforced, that some people live behind their reputations while others have none at all. It's not fair, but it's also not new. Even at 10 or 11, you know the world runs on who sees what and who pretends not to. The strange thing is, the punishments start to make sense, not because they're fair, but because you learn how to survive them. You don't cry. Or, if you do it quietly later, behind the woodshed. You pretend to be tougher than you are. You tell yourself the rules are just part of life. You watch for signs, raised voices, the way your father rubs his temples before speaking, the way your mother sighs before calling your name. You learn when to speak and when to nod, when to blame your brother, when to lie. Some historians argue that children in Tudor times were robbed of their innocence, that they were raised more like small adults, punished and prodded into obedience without much room for softness. Others claim that children found joy even amid harsh discipline, that love was still present, just expressed differently. Maybe both are true. Maybe love looks like a scolding followed by a larger piece of bread at supper. Maybe it's a switch on your backside followed by your father silently fixing your torn cloak later that night. You fall asleep that evening, with a sore shoulder and a heart that's still stinging from the day's lecture. You dream of running, of flying, of speaking without fear, but you also dream of home, of the fire, of your sister's humming, of waking up and knowing deep down that someone still wants you to grow, that even punishment in its own twisted way means they haven't given up on you yet. You're somewhere between a child and something else now, not quite old enough to have responsibilities with capital letters, but old enough that people stop laughing when you say silly things. They expect you to carry yourself a little straighter, speak a little softer, and start preparing for what comes next. This in-between time is awkward and confusing and filled with a strange sort of electricity. You don't have a word for it, but you feel it in your skin. Something's shifting. You're growing, stretching, being watched. You've become, whether you like it or not, a Tudor teenager. Your limbs feel too long. Your voice cracks unpredictably, especially when you try to sound confident. Your clothes don't fit right anymore. Either they're too short or your sleeves are pulling tight at the shoulders. If you're lucky, someone notices and lets out a hem or patches together, something from an older sibling's cast-offs. If you're unlucky, you wear the same outfit until it simply gives up trying to hold itself together. People have begun talking about your future in front of you, as if you're not in the room. He'll make a good apprentice, strong back on that one. Or, she's already of age, that hair will fetch her a fine match if she keeps it clean. You pretend not to hear, but you hear everything. You're being shired up like livestock at market, what you're good for, what you might pitch, whether you're worth the trouble of investing in. The most disorienting part is that you're still not entirely sure who you even are yet. If you're a boy, the conversations are about trades, guilds, apprenticeships, and maybe the church if you're clever, and someone in your family is willing to pull a few strings. You're expected to take things more seriously now. You're handed heavier tools. You're told to follow your father into the fields, or your uncle into the forge, or the village clerk into the freezing little office where the parish records are kept. You still daydream, of course, about war, about becoming a knight, about sailing off with a sword and a wink to conquer something important, but those dreams are starting to feel a little dusty, like things you'll have to give up eventually. If you're a girl, the future is even narrower. Your body is starting to change, and it doesn't go unnoticed. The jokes get meaner, the stares longer, the warnings sharper. You're told to keep your eyes down, to avoid certain boys, to never go anywhere alone, especially at night. You're handed more chores, more babies to hold, more rules to follow, and underneath it all, there's that constant humming pressure. Be good, be modest, be ready. Because any day now, someone might suggest that your childhood is over, and it's not you who gets to say otherwise. It's not that people don't care about your feelings, they just don't think they're relevant. You're still expected to smile, to help, to be grateful. If you complain, you're ungrateful. If you sulk, you're disrespectful. If you ask too many questions, you're rebellious. Boys get a little more leeway to misbehave. They are testing their strength. Girls get scolded faster. Because unlike boys, girls don't get a delayed launch into adulthood. When you bloom, you're basically on the launch pad, whether you're ready or not. Meanwhile, puberty sneaks in like a thief. One day you're running wild in the fields, and the next you're noticing that other people's faces have changed. Their bodies have changed. You catch yourself looking, then immediately looking away, then pretending you weren't looking at all. It's mortifying. It's also fascinating. You whisper about it with your friends, when the adults are out of earshot, obviously. You talk about whose voice dropped, who's growing what, and who's already been promised to someone in the next village over. There's something feverish about these teenage days. You're restless, itchy with ideas, tired of being told what to do, and not quite brave enough to actually disobey, yet. You begin to test the waters. You stay out a little too long. You talk back, just once, to see what happens. You pretend you know more than you do. Sometimes it works, sometimes it earns you a welt across the ear and a week of silence from your father. Still, the testing continues. You might get a glimpse of a court life through stories. Those flashy, glittering tales of kings and queens and nobles who wear clothes that drag on the floor and eat food with spices that cost more than your family's house. The Tudor court is a whirlwind of ambition, flirtation and sudden downfalls. You hear whispers about royal marriages and dramatic executions, all delivered like cautionary tales over stew. The lesson, aim too high and you'll end up shorter by a head. So maybe don't get too many ideas. Still, someone somewhere always thinks they can climb. Maybe it's you, maybe it's your friend who suddenly insists they're going to London to make their fortune. The dream of something more is always hovering, shimmering like a mirage over the muddy fields. You hear about young men who went to the city, apprenticed with a goldsmith and now wear hats with real feathers. Or girls who married well and now sleep in beds stuffed with goose down. You don't know if these stories are true, but you believe them, because why wouldn't you? Some days you get caught between who you were and who you're becoming. You find yourself picking up a stick and playing swords with a child half your age, only to drop it the second someone older walks by. You help your sister wash linens, humming softly, until someone reminds you to mind your modesty. You still have moments where you forget to act grown up, and when they pass you feel a strange kind of sadness. Like you've misplaced something you can't get back. Open debates in the historical world circle around just how long childhood really lasted in Tudor England. Some say it ended early, around 7 or 8. Others argue it stretched into the early teens for most, especially in rural areas where the line between child and useful worker was blurry. But one thing's certain, The moment puberty made its entrance, expectations hardened like day-old bread. You're not just a child anymore. You're a future bride, a future labourer, a future problem if you don't learn to behave. But despite it all, despite the rules and the fears and the tightening social noose, there are still moments that feel like your own. You laugh too hard at something stupid. You run faster than anyone else across the field. You catch someone looking at you a little too long, and you feel, just for a moment, powerful. Like maybe, just maybe, you'll have some say in what comes next. That night you sit by the hearth, legs sore, thoughts louder than usual. Someone is telling a story, an old one, about a girl who tricked a nobleman or a boy who outwitted the devil. You listen quietly, the fire warming your cheeks, the smell of peat and onions drifting through the air. You don't believe the story. Not really, but you want to, because deep down you hope it's possible to grow up and still keep a little of the magic. Food has always been a fact of life in Tudor England. Basic, repetitive, and mostly beige. But now that you're older, you start noticing more than just whether or not you're hungry. You notice how food shapes everything: status, mood, seasons, even affection. You learn that not all meals are created equal, and that some bellies stay fuller longer than others. In your house, meals aren't just nourishment. They're politics, they're power, they're command, when you can get them. Your day starts with bread, not the soft, fluffy kind that smells like heaven and sunshine. No, this is dense, hard, often a little stale. If you're lucky, it's flavoured with ale or boiled with onion to soften it. If you're really lucky, there's cheese, not the melty sort, a wedge that could double as a blunt weapon. Cheese you gnaw like an animal and savour like gold. And of course ale. Always ale, not strong enough to get you tipsy, but enough to keep you from drinking the water, which is often teeming with invisible horrors that no one has the science to describe, but everyone instinctively fears. Then there's pottage. Always pottage. A bubbling, sludgy mix of whatever grains, beans, roots and wilted greens could be scrounged or saved. Sometimes it's thick like glue. Sometimes it's so thin it feels like the pot gave up halfway through. Occasionally there's meat in it. Small bits, like the ghost of a chicken leg or a sliver of last week's bacon. More often it's bulked out with barley, leeks, cabbage, and anything that hasn't gone too sour to chew. You eat it with a spoon if you have one, or tear off chunks of bread and scoop it out of a shared bowl. When it comes to meat, it's rare, a celebration. Maybe once a week, maybe less. If someone slaughters a pig, it's a whole event. The air fills with a strange mixture of excitement, smoke and blood. You watch as every single part of the animal is used. Heart, liver, fat, skin, even the feet. The meat is salted, smoked, hung in the rafters, or packed into earthen crocks with herbs and lard. It's not pretty, but it's survival. And when that meat shows up on your plate days or weeks later, even after it's shrunk into a shriveled grey puck, you eat it with ceremony. Slowly, gratefully. Eggs, milk and the butter come and go with the moods of the animals. If the hens are laying, you might get a poached egg in your porridge. If the cow isn't sick, there's milk for the baby. Butter is a luxury, best used sparingly, unless you're boiling it with herbs to smear on a rare cut of mutton. And fish? Fish is either dried and tough or so fresh it's still twitching when it hits the pan. If you live near the coast or a river, it's more common, but for most, fish means Fridays. You choke it down with prayers and pick bones out of your teeth for the next hour. Desserts? Technically yes, realistically not often. Rich families might have fruit pies, marzipan, spiced cakes and sweetmeats. You, if you're lucky, get a bit of honey on your bread or a baked apple filled with crumbs and herbs. On feast days, there might be fritters, bits of dough fried in lard, sprinkled with sugar if someone's been hoarding it. You remember those days. The smell alone is enough to make your mouth water for a week afterward. Sugar is rare and expensive, imported from foreign lands and kept locked up like treasure. Some say it rots your teeth. You don't care. You'd eat it by the handful if you could. Meals happen around the same time every day, if food is available. There's no breakfast buffet, no midnight snack. You eat when the cooking's done and not before. You eat fast. You don't complain, ever. Complaining about food is the fastest way to get stuck with the burnt crust or the soup skin. Everyone has their own quiet system of fairness. First come, best served. Unless your father's in a foul mood, in which case he gets everything first, and everyone else tries to look small. If you live in a manor house or noble estate, the rules are different. There's a kitchen staff, a pantry full of smoked game and imported goods, a hall where meals are served in courses, not scoops. Even then, not all nobles eat well all the time. Famine and poor harvest don't discriminate, and if you're deep in the countryside, even the wealthy have to deal with mouldy grain and tough mutton, but still, they eat better. They eat more, they eat with more ceremony. Grace, hand-washing, cloth napkins, plates not made of stale bread. That alone makes them feel immortal. But for you, food is never certain. It depends on the land, the weather, the animals, and whether your village gets hit by blight or bad luck. A late frost can ruin the barley. A disease can wipe out half the livestock. And when that happens, meals shrink. Bowls go half-filled, bread gets thinner, tougher. People start grinding up acorns or bark into the flour. It tastes like dirt and you eat it anyway. There are moments, though, when food becomes more than just survival. Feast days, weddings, festivals. Then the whole village comes alive with cooking, fires crackle. Pies steam, pigs roast on spits, dripping fat into the flames. You run around barefoot, snatching bits of bread, scraping bowls, sneaking berries. You're scolded but not punished. It's a celebration after all, a moment when even the poorest can pretend they're royalty, when your belly fills and the air smells like possibility. Curiously, people believed in the medicinal properties of what they ate, or what they didn't. Boiled nettles were said to purify the blood. Onions could prevent plague. Bread made from white flour was considered less healthy than dark rye. And if you had a stomachache, you might be fed a mixture of ale and soot. The humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, were always being balanced. Every bite you took was a gamble in a centuries-old game of bodily alchemy. There's debate even now about how nutritious Tudor diets really were. Some scholars argue that rural diets, though lacking variety, were surprisingly decent. Grain, root vegetables, seasonal greens and occasional meat. Others point out the lack of vitamin C, the prevalence of spoiled or contaminated food, and the constant hunger during bad years. But to you there's no question. Food is survival, and every bite matters. Tonight you eat your fill. The pottage is thicker than usual and someone added leeks. There's a hunk of bread still soft in the centre, and even a smear of lard if you scrape carefully. You eat in silence, grateful. The fire burns low. Your hands are greasy. You lick them, wipe them on your smock, and lean back, full in that simple, timeless way that feels like a miracle. You don't need spice or sugar or imported wine. Just warmth, food, and a little more bread tomorrow. Puberty isn't subtle in Tudor England. It arrives like a cart with a broken wheel, loud, disruptive, impossible to ignore. One day you wake up and something's changed. You can't explain what exactly, but you feel it. A new weight in your chest, a new pitch in your voice, a dull ache into places no one ever talks about. Your face gets greasier, your limbs ganglier, and suddenly your parents are looking at you like they're not quite sure who you are anymore. Neither are you. Your skin becomes a battlefield. Pimples and boils make appearances with no warning, and even less mercy. There's no such thing as skincare here, just hope and herbs. Maybe someone slathers you with a paste made of crushed mint, vinegar and clay. Maybe someone else just mutters a prayer and tells you not to pick at it, which of course you do. You try not to look in reflective surfaces too often, because when you do, it's not your face staring back, it's the awkward half-formed ghost of someone who might someday be considered attractive. Not now though. Definitely not now. If you're a girl, things get even more complicated. Your body starts to change and people notice. Too much. Everyone has advice, everyone has opinions. Your mother, your aunts, your older sisters, they all start saying the same things with different words. Walk straight, keep your hands folded, don't laugh too loudly, and for God's sake, don't let the boys catch you smiling. Somewhere between your 11th and 14th year, you start to bleed, and suddenly you're no longer a child whether you feel ready or not. No one throws a party. No one explains anything particularly well. Just a few herbs, a bit of linen, and a vague warning about keeping clean. The superstitions begin to swirl around you like smoke. Some believe menstruation is dangerous, that your blood can sour milk or spoil bread. You're told to avoid the butter churn during your time of the month lest it curdle. Others say you're at your most fertile and thus most dangerous. Boys get lectures about avoiding temptation. Girls get warned about cunning lads and what happens to unwed mothers. The implication is always the same. Anything that goes wrong is your fault. If you're a boy, you're expected to grow into your strength, to carry more, work harder, speak louder. But you're also expected to start acting like a man, which means less play, more scowling, and the deeply uncomfortable task of pretending you understand things you very much do not. Your voice starts cracking at the worst possible times, usually during prayers or while trying to impress someone at a feast. You grow fuzz on your chin and get mocked mercilessly until it either becomes a beard or disappears in shame. And then there's the issue of lust. No one says the word directly, of course, but the church talks about sin more often than usual now, and they're clearly looking in your direction. There are long sermons about purity, about resisting the devil, about the dangers of desire. The adults all pretend like they don't remember what it's like, but you do. You're living it. You have feelings you can't control, thoughts that sneak up on you, dreams that make you wake up confused and guilty. You try to confess them. The priest sighs. He's heard it all before. Bathing doesn't help. Not because you don't try, though let's be honest, you don't try very often, but because there's only so much a wooden tub of lukewarm water can do. Soap is harsh, homemade, and smells vaguely of onions. You scrub what you can, but the oil on your skin, the sweat from working, and the constant filth in the air all combine into a kind of scent that no one in your era notices, unless it gets particularly bad. Then someone dumps lavender on you and tells you to sit downwind. And then, just when your body is confusing enough, someone you know starts looking different. Not bad, not odd, just interesting. A boy who used to throw stones at frogs suddenly has a jawline. The girl you used to tease about her missing tooth now laughs in a way that makes you stare too long. You don't know what to do with this awareness. You poke, you insult your birds, you pretend you didn't notice. Or, if you're bold, you toss an apple their way and hope they catch it. That's practically a love letter here. Of course, love isn't exactly romantic, at least not for most people. It's not something you're expected to find or choose, it's something that gets arranged. Based on land, family ties, business, or reputation. Maybe your parents have already started looking, maybe you've overheard your name paired with someone else's. You laugh it off, but deep down, it's terrifying to you more. You don't feel like you know yourself yet. The idea of belonging to someone else, forever, is as strange as flying. Still, the thrill of it all starts to seep into your blood. You sneak glances at people. You linger longer than you should. You write someone's name in the dirt and immediately erase it. You start noticing what colours look best on you, how to stand so your shoulders look broader, or how to braid your hair just right. Not because anyone told you to, but because somewhere in your stomach, a butterfly is waking up and demanding attention. And you're still working, still chopping wood or washing pots, tending fields, feeding siblings. Puberty doesn't get you out of chores. If anything, it earns you more. You're big enough now to help with the harvest, to walk behind the plough, to carry water in both hands, to assist the midwife if you're a girl or to run errands for the local magistrate. If you're a boy with good posture and quiet boots, you're not just a child anymore, you're an asset, and assets are expected to pull their weight. There are rumours too. You start hearing about things, illicit kisses in the barn, hands where they shouldn't be, a girl who was sent away to live with her aunt. The details are vague, deliberately so, but you get the gist. One wrong move, one bad night, and you could ruin your whole family's standing. Reputation isn't just about pride here, it's currency, and once it's spent, it's nearly impossible to earn back. Still, you risk it. A whispered joke, a shared secret, a look across the church pew, a flower left on someone's doorstep. You pretend it's nothing, but it's everything. Some historians debate how freely Tudor teens could explore relationships before marriage. In some cases, bundling was allowed, a practice where two teens lay in bed together, fully clothed under close supervision. Romantic, right? Others argue that any premarital intimacy was harshly punished. The truth is likely somewhere in between. There were rules, but there were also shadows, and in the shadows, anything could happen. That night, you lie in bed, heart pounding from nothing in particular. Just the day, just the possibility of everything. Your body feels unfamiliar, like it's no longer entirely yours. Your thoughts are louder now, hungrier. You close your eyes and dream of kisses you've never had and futures you're not sure you want. Outside, the moon is bright and high, watching everything, watching you. You've reached the age of choice, or more accurately, the age where choices are made for you. You might be 12, or maybe 13, possibly already 15 if your family's on the fence about when exactly your birthday falls. There are no candles, no cake, no moment of fanfare that tells you, hey, welcome to adulthood. Instead, you wake up one morning and someone says, time you started earning your keep, and that's that. Childhood, such as it was, has quietly packed its things and left. If you're a boy, The most likely path is apprenticeship. This sounds exciting, like a trade, a skill, something to master, but in reality, it means becoming someone's live-in servant for the next 7 years. 7. That's more than half your life up to this point. The master could be a blacksmith, a tailor, a baker, a cobbler, maybe even a scrivener if your letters are good and someone important takes a liking to you. But whatever the trade, it comes with long hours, strict discipline, and the understanding that you're there to work, not to chat or ask questions. You're packed off with a bundle of clothes and whatever tools your family can afford to spare, usually none, and a few words of advice that mostly boil down to keep your head down. You might miss home within the first day, or you might not. Maybe you're ready. Maybe your father's temper or your mother's endless nagging have pushed you to the point where scrubbing pans for a bald baker in another town sounds like paradise. But the homesickness creeps in anyway. At night, when you're lying on the straw in a freezing attic, listening to rats in the rafters and trying not to cough too loudly. If you're a girl, you may be apprenticed too, though it's more often called being placed. Maybe with a midwife, a merchant's wife, or a local noblewoman who needs extra hands for her growing household. More likely though, you're being prepared for marriage. It's not as dramatic as it sounds, no white dress, no blushing bride, just a series of conversations between adults about what you're worth, what he owns, and whether your families can tolerate each other. Love isn't even on the list. Neither is your opinion, if we're being honest. Some girls do get apprenticed to actual trades, spinning, weaving, dairy work, even brewing if you're from the right kind of family. But even then, the expectation is that all of this is temporary. You're learning how to manage a house, not a business. You're being trained to be helpful, not independent. If you're lucky, your placement is close by. If not, you're sent to another town entirely, where the customs are slightly different and people speak just enough like you that you feel constantly off balance. And the homes you're sent into, they're not always kind. Some are bustling, warm places with clear expectations and decent meals. Others are cold, joyless pits, where you're more property than person. You learn fast not to speak unless spoken to. You clean, you carry, you assist with everything from births to brewing, and you do it all while pretending you're invisible. Some masters are fair, others are cruel, and there's always the threat, spoken or unspoken, that if you make trouble, you'll be sent back home in shame, or worse, with nothing at all. Then there's marriage. It might start as whispers. He's got a good flock, or her dowry's not much, but she's quiet. Then suddenly, it's real. You're betrothed. Just like that. Maybe to someone twice your age, maybe to someone your cousin kissed behind the chapel last year. You've heard the stories. Some girls make good matches, end up with kind husbands and steady homes. Others don't. You've seen it. Bruises no one talks about. Eyes that don't meet yours. Women who age 10 years in their first season as wives. But there are moments of hope, too. A boy from another village who looks at you like you're a person, not a transaction. A girl who laughs at your jokes and isn't afraid of her own thoughts. These connections bloom like weeds between the cracks. Quick, stubborn, beautiful in their defiance. They rarely last, but they're real. You still see your childhood friends, sometimes. The girl who played dolls with you now carries a baby on her hip. The boy who stole your bread now works dawn to dusk in the tannery, his hands permanently stained and cracked. You pass each other in the street, nod, maybe say a quick hello. That's all there's time for. Life has divided you all into lanes, and stepping out of them is frowned upon. Some boys try to escape it. Runaways aren't unheard of. Apprentices who pack up their few possessions and vanish in the middle of the night, hoping for better luck in London or Bristol. Sometimes they're caught, dragged back, beaten and tied to their beds. Other times they disappear completely. No one knows if they starved, joined a travelling troupe of players, or ended up swinging from a gallows for stealing bread. Either way, their names are spoken quietly, a mixture of awe and pity. And yes, there are pimps. Not the velvet hat kind, but the quiet, dangerous men who offer escape and end up demanding everything in return. They circle the edges of markets and festivals, looking for girls without strong families. Some offer work as serving girls, as seamstresses, as entertainers. Some of it's real. Most of it isn't. You learn to spot them, to keep your eyes down, to stick close to people who'll protect you. Because Tudor England doesn't forgive naivety. Odd fact, some apprentices sign indentures that include punishments for playing dice, keeping women's company, or singing lewd songs, which, if we're being honest, are the only 3 things that make the job bearable. You laugh when you hear that. Quietly, carefully, then you go back to sweeping. Historians argue over how much autonomy Tudor youths really had. Some claim most were trapped in roles they never chose. Others say apprenticeship and early marriage offered structure in a dangerous, uncertain world. Both are probably true, but from your side of things, it doesn't feel like structure. It feels like a slow narrowing of doors. Fewer choices, fewer chances to breathe, and yet, you adapt. You find small freedoms, a morning walk before the house stirs, a letter scratched in secret tucked behind a rafter, a moment at market where you laugh too loud and no one scolds you. You hold on to those moments because they're yours. At night, you lie in a new bed, narrow, cold, unfamiliar, and stare at a ceiling you don't recognise. You ache all over, your hands are sore, you miss the smell of your mother's stew, but in the quiet you whisper your own name just to remember it. You are still you, maybe not a child anymore, but still here. News travels slowly in Tudor England, but gossip gallops. If someone sneezes oddly in the next village, you'll hear about it before the week's out, along with 4 versions of why they sneezed, 2 theories about demonic possession, and at least 1 rumour that they were cursed by a jealous cousin. There are no newspapers, no printing presses churning out breaking headlines for commoners, and certainly no way for someone like you to know what's truly happening at court unless it filters down through 10 layers of misremembered stories and dramatic whispers. So instead, you get your news the old-fashioned way, from mouths, and mouths in your village rarely stop moving. Gossip spills from alehouses and market stalls, is baked into the bread, sewn into seams and stirred into the pottage. You hear it while fetching water, while working in the fields, even while pretending to sleep as your elders talk by firelight. Most of it is nonsense, but some of it sticks. Someone's cow has gone dry. Someone else found an unfamiliar boot print behind their barn. A travelling peddler claims he saw Queen Elizabeth herself riding through a village dressed as a peasant, unrecognised by all. You know that can't be true. Why would a queen go anywhere without 50 trumpets and a carriage the size of a shed? But still, you tell it again, because the truth, while important, is often less interesting than a good story. You get used to the rhythm of how information spreads. First, someone hears something, a rumour about a rebellion, a change in church law, a new tax. Then someone else hears it and adds a detail. By the time it reaches you, the tale's usually swollen like a dead sheep in the sun. You listen, nod, pretend to believe it, and tuck the juiciest bits away to share later. The more dramatic, the better. Someone's cousin saw a witch. Someone else swears they saw a ghost in the rectory. You don't ask questions, you lean in and listen. Your primary sources of official information are sermons and proclamations. Every Sunday you go to church, by law remember, and the priest does more than just talk about sins and saints. He also relays whatever news has trickled down from on high. New laws, new taxes, new executions. It's not framed as news, of course. It's wrapped in scripture and morality, delivered with enough Latin and fire to make everyone feel appropriately nervous. You sit there trying not to fidget while thinking about how the king's latest enemy got drawn and quartered, and whether that's better or worse than being burned. Sometimes a town crier passes through. Not in your village, unless something truly earth-shattering's happening, but nearby, maybe during market days or festivals. He reads from a scroll, usually shouting things no one fully understands. If he's literate, he reads the official royal decrees. If not, he memorises what he's told and repeats it with theatrical flair. Either way, by the end of the week, someone's convinced that Spain has invaded, the king is dead, or beer is being outlawed. None of it is true, but again, fun to say out loud. You also get news from the traders and travellers who pass through on their way to somewhere fancier. They wear better cloaks, speak too quickly, and smell like cinnamon and horse sweat. You hang around them when you can, hoping to overhear something valuable. Sometimes they mention the price of grain or talk about a noble wedding. Other times they boast about seeing plays in London. Real plays, with actors who can read and pretend to be kings. You pretend not to care, but your ears burn with curiosity. At fairs and festivals, the news becomes performance. Mummers and balladeers weave current events into their songs and skits, usually twisted just enough to avoid being accused of treason. A comic might dress like the local bishop and stumble around pretending to bless pigs. Everyone laughs, even the priest. But no one says the word Protestant too loudly. Not in public, not after what happened in the next county over, where someone was accused of harbouring papists and hasn't been seen since. This is also how rumours about people in power thrive. You hear that the Queen bathes once a month in milk, that the king before her had 6 wives and one of them was a witch, or maybe just French, that the Bishop of London has a third ear under his wig? All untrue, probably. But again, no one's checking, and who would want to ruin a perfectly good story by making it accurate? Even locally, gossip is its own economy. You trade it like bread using information as currency. You let slip that your neighbour's daughter was seen leaving the woods after sunset, and someone else offers up that the butcher's apprentice has a suspicious bruise and a guilty expression. You don't know what it means, but now it's your turn to carry the tale a little farther, maybe dressed up with a few flourishes. You've seen the grown-ups do it. It's practically a sport. Sometimes the gossip turns dark. When someone gets sick, people ask questions. Was it just bad air or something else? Did they anger someone? Say the wrong prayer? A mole in the wrong place? A birthmark? An offhand comment about herbs? And suddenly people look at you differently. You know not to speak too openly about your dreams, or to share strange thoughts aloud. Being different is dangerous. You've seen people called out for less. A woman with too many cats. A man who spends too much time alone. The village keeps an invisible ledger of who's normal and who's not. And the moment someone crosses the line, the whispers begin. Quirky fact: one of the most popular ways for Tudor folks to get news was through ballads, songs printed on single sheets of paper called broadsides. These were sold by hawkers who sang the tunes in markets, hoping to draw a crowd. Think of it as the world's first musical news bulletin. A lamentable tale of a drunken miller who fell into his own vat was probably more memorable than anything preached on Sunday. Modern scholars debate whether this era was truly information-starved or just selective. You weren't ignorant, just filtered. What you heard was shaped by what others wanted you to know, or by what made the best story. You lived in a world of half-truths and theatrical lies, and somehow it worked. Most of the time. At the end of the day, you sit by the fire, full of half-stories and rumours. You think about the traveller who said the Queen wore jewels the size of eggs. You think about the ballad of the maid who danced with death and was never seen again. And you wonder which story will be about you someday. Which tale will carry your name into someone else's kitchen, whispered in awe or scandal, or both. You smile in the dark and decide to keep listening. You wake to the sound of bells. Not the warning kind, those are louder and shriller, but the heavy, cheerful clang that means today isn't just any day. Today's a holy day, a feast day, or maybe even a fair day if the weather's good, and the lord of the manor isn't feeling especially tight-fisted. You sit up fast, your blanket of straw and scratchy wool tumbling away, and already the air smells different. Someone's baking. Somewhere nearby a fire roars louder than usual. You don't even mind the cold floor under your feet. Today things are different. Tudor life doesn't give you many breaks, but when it does them with flair. Holy days, of which there are dozens, are part of the rhythm of the year, dictated by saints, seasons, and a church calendar that even the priest probably needs help keeping track of. Some are solemn, others are wild, but all of them mean one thing above all else: slightly less work. You're still expected to help, of course. This is England. No one truly escapes labour unless you're dead or noble. But today the chores feel lighter. You scrub the pots faster, carry water without grumbling, and even hum a little. Because you know that after the morning work is done, the rest of the day is yours. Or at least mostly yours. You hear whispers that there'll be dancing, maybe even mummers. Maybe, if the church isn't feeling too stern, a bit of ale for the older kids and a fire big enough to roast an entire pig. The holidays that get the most attention are the ones that come with pageantry. Easter, Christmas, Candlemas, and the Feast of Corpus Christi. Then there's May Day, which is your personal favourite. Something about the fresh air, the music, the maypole, tall and ribbon-wrapped like a giant piece of candy, and the way everyone pretends for just one day that the world isn't full of death and chores and rules. Even the grumpiest old man in the village taps his foot during May Day. You dress differently too, maybe not in fine clothes, those are for weddings or burials, but in your cleanest smock or tunic, with your hair brushed and your face scrubbed so hard your cheeks are pink. If you're a girl, maybe there's a crown of flowers. If you're a boy, a feather tucked into your cap. You don't dress to impress royalty, you dress to impress the people you see every day, because today someone might notice. As the day unfolds, the village transforms. There are stalls with bread and honey. Minstrels show up with lutes and half-tuned viols. Jugglers pass through, tossing apples or knives, or whatever they can find. Someone sells ribbons, pins and charms blessed by a hermit in Devon. You know they're not real, but you stare at them anyway. They glint in the sun, promising impossible things, luck, love, long life. You don't buy one, but you remember the shape of the charm long after. Games break out in the green, wrestling matches, sack races, tug of war with a rope thick enough to anchor a ship. Boys puff up their chests, girls pretend not to watch, and somewhere in the distance, a couple vanishes behind a haystack for a little too long. No one mentions it. Everyone notices. One of the loudest events is the hobby horse, a man dressed in ribbons and rags with a wooden frame around his waist, pretending to be half beast, half man. He gallops through the crowd, snapping his jaws, shouting nonsense, and making children scream in delight or fear, sometimes both. He grabs hands, steals caps, demands kisses, and reminds everyone that holy days aren't just about saints, they're also about chaos. You laugh so hard your stomach hurts. If you're especially lucky, there might be mummers, travelling players who perform short rowdy plays in the village square. Their stories are nonsense. Knights and dragons, fools and devils, kings returning from the dead. They wear masks, swap roles mid-act, and speak in rhymes that barely hold together. You've seen the same play 3 times this year and still cheer like it's brand new. Partly because it's fun, partly because you know someone in the audience is probably hearing it for the first time, and that makes it fresh all over again. And then there's the food. Sweet, hot, rare. Maybe a meat pie if you're lucky. Maybe bread baked with herbs, or a rare bit of preserved fruit folded into pastry. Someone shares roasted nuts. Someone else offers small cups of spiced ale or cider. You've tasted stronger drink before. Your uncle sneaks you sips when your mother isn't looking. But today you sip carefully, because you want to remember it all. The taste, the noise, the heat of the sun on your shoulders. The priest still shows up, of course. He makes a speech about the real meaning of the feast, about saints and sacrifice, and everyone listens respectfully. For a minute. Then someone coughs, someone else sneezes, and a sheep breaks loose and gets tangled in a garland. The priest sighs. You think even he enjoys these days, though he'd never admit it. There's debate among historians about how wild these holidays really were. Some suggest they were carefully controlled, rituals designed to reinforce authority. Others argue they were genuine releases, temporary reversals of the strict Tudor order. For one day, servants could mock masters, girls could outrun boys, and fools could be kings. Your experience leans toward the latter. You've seen things on feast days you never see any other time. Your mother dancing, your father smiling, your neighbours laughing with people they normally avoid. And once the sun begins to sink, the fire grows. Bonfires mark the end of holy days, tall, crackling towers of light that seem to scrape the sky. You gather around with everyone else, your face warm, your back cold. Songs are sung, old ones, some in languages no one really speaks anymore. You hum along anyway. You hear stories too, tales of saints and miracles, of animals that speak on certain nights, of people who vanished into the woods and came back changed. One man swears he saw a ghost at the last feast. Another claims his cow gave birth to twins after he danced all night under the maypole. Everyone laughs, but no one truly doubts him. Not tonight, not with the fire burning so high and the stars watching from above. You sit close to someone, maybe a friend, maybe someone you're not sure is just a friend anymore. Your knees touch. You say nothing. You don't need to. The air is full of meaning. You don't want the night to end, but it does, eventually. The embers die down, the crowd thins. The last song is sung. You trudge home barefoot, head spinning, heart light. The next morning it'll be back to work. Back to chores, to silence, to seriousness. But for tonight, you feel alive in a way that's hard to explain. As if the rules of the world have loosened just enough to let a little magic in. You lie down in bed, still smelling of smoke and flowers and sugared bread. You close your eyes and dream not of saints or sermons, but of colour, laughter, and a dancing wooden horse that chased you through the green. You don't always understand the laws, but you feel their weight. They're not like the rules your mother whispers at the dinner table, or the church lectures you half listen to during Sunday service. Tudor laws live in the ground, in the air, and the corners of people's eyes. You can't always name them, but you know what happens when they're broken. And more importantly, you know what happens when you're the one who gets caught breaking them. It starts with whispers, mostly. Someone took more grain than their share. Someone else's sheep was found grazing on land they didn't own. There's been talk of poachers in the Lord's woods, boys with slings de ratours or stinking traps slipping through the underbrush after sunset. If they're caught, they'll be punished. Harshly, because in Tudor England, stealing from the land isn't just theft. It's theft from the king's system, from God's appointed order. And the punishments aren't exactly subtle. For most minor crimes, punishment is local, public, and designed to leave a mark, either on your body or your pride. Stocks are the most common. Wooden boards with holes for your head and hands, usually set up in the middle of the village where everyone can see you, mock you, throw things if they're feeling bold. You're left there for hours, sunburnt, sore, ashamed. You try not to cry, you try not to make eye contact with your friends. One of them, if they're brave, might slip you an apple. That's the closest you'll get to mercy. More serious offences might land you in the pillory. Similar setup, but with more pain. You stand exposed, while people throw rotten food, rocks, sometimes worse. It's not just about the crime. It's about teaching everyone else what happens when you step out of line. The law here isn't about justice, it's about fear. There's no police force, no detectives, just constables, watchmen, and the occasional wandering sheriff with a scroll of names and a very bad mood. If something goes wrong, it's the village that decides what to do, and sometimes fairly, sometimes not. If someone doesn't like you, if you've been a little too proud, a little too quiet, or if your family's already got a reputation for trouble, then congratulations, you're the most likely suspect. And if the accusation is serious, then it's off to court. Not the royal kind with powdered wigs and scrolls. The local manorial court, or assizes, where justice is handed out like stale bread, quick, dry, and liable to make you choke. If you're under 14, they might show mercy. Might. If you're a girl, it depends who you embarrassed. If you're a boy, it depends how scared the adults are that you're turning into your father. Punishments escalate fast. Branding, flogging, mutilation. If you steal something valuable, say a loaf of bread, during a famine year, you could lose a hand. Not in theory, in practice. A blunt axe, a block of wood, a priest muttering prayers. Sometimes they botch it. You hear stories about people who walked away with half a hand, the other half crushed, but still barely hanging on. They usually don't live long. But the worst punishment, death, isn't reserved just for murderers. It's for traitors, witches, heretics, and thieves unlucky enough to get caught during a royal crackdown. Hanging is the most common. Quick if the rope is new, slow if it's not. You've heard of public executions drawing crowds from miles away. Vendors set up nearby, children sit on shoulders. It's both theatre and warning. And if it's a traitor, that's when things get grim, drawing and quartering. You don't know all the details. You don't want to. Sometimes punishment is quieter but just as final. Banishment. Exile. Being cast out from your village with nothing but what you can carry, your name whispered like a curse. No one helps in exile. No one shelters them. It's a slow sentence. Most don't survive long. Then there are the punishments that aren't punishments, at least not officially. Being shunned, ignored, shut out of the community. No one says anything. They just stop saying anything to you. It happens when your family does something shameful, or when rumours cling to your name like mildew. It's not written in any law book, but it leaves scars deeper than the lash. You try to stay on the right side of things, most people do. You keep your head down, your words polite, your behaviour neat. But accidents happen. You break something you weren't supposed to touch. You say something you didn't know was forbidden. You get caught somewhere you weren't meant to be. And suddenly the air changes. Eyes narrow, voices quiet. The village starts watching. Fringe fact. In some cases, animals were put on trial. Actual, legal trials. Pigs, dogs, even roosters. They were accused of crimes, killing a child, disturbing the peace, being in league with the devil, and were assigned lawyers, witnesses, and judges. Some were hanged, others were exiled. You're not sure if that's funny or terrifying, maybe both. Scholars today debate just how brutal Tudor justice really was. Some argue that executions were rare and meant only for the worst offences. Others point to the written laws, harsh, unforgiving, and oddly specific. There were over 200 crimes punishable by a myth, including stealing a rabbit. A rabbit. Whether or not they were enforced consistently is unclear. But the fear, that was Emil. You feel it every time someone raises their voice and everyone else falls silent. There are rules in your house, in your village, in your country, and now you know they're not optional, they're not flexible. And when you hear about someone who broke them, you don't ask questions. You just whisper their name and remind yourself to be careful. That night, you sit by the hearth, your knees drawn up, your eyes flicking between shadows. Someone's telling a story about a boy who stole a coin and was never seen again. Probably a fable, probably. But you don't laugh, you tuck your hands into your sleeves and stay very, very still. Because in this world, safety doesn't come from being right. It comes from being invisible. The church looms over your life, literally and figuratively. Its stone tower casts a long shadow across the village, and even when you're nowhere near it, you still feel its presence, like a second set of eyes watching your every move. The sound of the bells sets the rhythm of your week, your year, your entire existence. On Sundays, you go. On feast days, you go. On fast days, you go. When someone dies, is born, gets married, confesses, or just vaguely needs divine attention, you go. No one asks if you believe. That's not the point. Attendance isn't about faith, it's about survival. Inside, it's dim and cold. The windows let in dusty beams of colour. The air smells like damp stone and wax. And the pews, if your village even has pews, are hard and splintered. You shift from foot to foot, trying not to yawn while the priest drones in a mixture of English and Latin, which you're technically supposed to understand by now, but honestly, you don't. Not fully. You catch the tone though, the rhythm, the warnings about sin, the promises of hell, the occasional hopeful bit about salvation if you're really, really sorry, and also a better person than you've ever managed to be. You've been taught to fear God, not love him. Love is too soft a word. God in the world you live in is powerful, angry, meticulous, keeps lists, watches your thoughts, punishes not just actions but desires. You've been told he struck people down with plague, with famine, with floods. You've been told he listens to prayers, but sometimes it feels like he's listening mostly for mistakes. Still you pray, because you have to. Morning prayers, evening prayers, mealtime prayers. You've memorized them like songs, recited them until the words lost meaning, then found their meaning again in the middle of a storm or a particularly bad illness. You cross yourself in habit. You kneel on cold floors. You whisper names of saints you've never met, hoping they'll pass on your messages to someone higher up the chain. There are rituals, endless rituals, and each one has a time and place. Baptism as a baby, cold water and crying, confirmation when you're a bit older, though you barely remember it. And someday maybe marriage, maybe not, but definitely death. Death is the one sacrament no one avoids. You've seen the process more than once. The candles, the prayers, the sudden silence of someone who had been part of your life just days before. The ground swallows them, the church blesses the dirt, and life goes on. It has to. The church calendar is a beast of its own. There's Advent and Lent and Pentecost, and you're not quite sure what all of them mean, but you know what's expected during each. Lent means no meat, more guilt, longer sermons. Advent means candle lighting and the hope, never guaranteed, of treats. Easter brings flowers and fire. Christmas brings songs and sometimes joy, though the priest insists that joy is a dangerous thing if you're not careful with it. Then there's confession. It doesn't happen every week, but often enough that it haunts your thoughts. You sit in a cold box or corner whispering sins you're not entirely sure are sins. You confessed to stealing a plum once, even though you didn't, just to see what would happen. The priest didn't blink, just assigned prayers and waved you off. You were both bored. You've also confessed to real things, sharp thoughts, lies, wanting something forbidden. Those confessions felt different, like peeling something sticky from your soul. Temporary relief followed by immediate guilt for having enjoyed the relief. You've heard whispers that not all priests are holy, that some drink too much, that others collect more than they're supposed to, that one was seen visiting a woman's house long after dark. But no one says these things loudly. The church is the church. The men inside it may falter, but the building, the power, the presence, that's untouchable. And yet it's changing, slowly, confusingly. The older folk remember when Mass was always in Latin, when there were shrines everywhere, candles for every saint. Then came Henry and his break with Rome, then Edward, and suddenly things were even more Protestant. Then Mary and the fires came, burning those who dared to reform too fast. Now it's Elizabeth, and the pendulum has swung again, officially Protestant, but still with trappings of the old ways. You don't really understand what changed, only that it keeps happening, and it keeps being dangerous to care too much. You've seen people whisper about doctrine, seen people leave the service before the final hymn, seen someone taken away for refusing to take communion. You know that people have been tortured for choosing the wrong flavour of Christianity. Papist, Protestant, Puritan, You hear the words, but they feel like labels stuck on things you were never meant to read. You nod when you're supposed to, bow your head when expected. It's safest that way. Still, religion does offer comfort. During storms, during sickness. When your sibling burns with fever and the midwife runs out of remedies, it's the priest who comes murmuring in Latin, drawing crosses in the air. When someone goes missing in the woods, it's the church bell that calls the village together. When famine looms and the fields fail, you don't curse the skies. You beg. You kneel. You light a candle. You ask for mercy from a heaven that often seems more interested in tests than kindness. And then there are the fringe beliefs, the unofficial religion that sits alongside the official one. You've seen your mother sprinkle salt at the door. Your neighbour ties a red ribbon around her child's wrist to ward off evil. No one talks about it during service, but after, over stews and laundry and whispered conversations, those beliefs bloom. Stories of spirits, of fair folk in the woods, of the devil walking the roads in human form, offering deals in exchange for things no child should ever promise. Quirky fact, some people believed yawnings without covering your mouth gave the devil a chance to enter. So when your friend yawns during prayers and forgets to cover up, you stare in horror and whisper a blessing under your breath just in case. Scholars debate whether Tudor people were truly devout or simply terrified. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Fear, yes, but also awe, also hope, also the kind of quiet faith that lives in songs and seasons, in the lighting of a single candle on a long winter night. That night, you lie in bed, hands folded on your chest like you've seen in paintings of the dead. You whisper a prayer, half out of habit, half out of hope. You ask for nothing in particular, just safety, just tomorrow. And as you drift off, you think of stained glass windows, flickering flames, and the endless sound of bells echoing through the dark. You've never actually seen the Queen, but you know what she looks like. Everyone does. Her portrait hangs in the local hall, painted with impossible skin, regal posture, and eyes that seem to follow you even when you try not to look. You've seen woodcuts of her in the market, and ballads sung in her honour. Her face is on coins, her name in prayers. God save the Queen, the priest says, and you all murmur it back, even though none of you have ever come within 100 miles of her. Still, she is there. Always, like weather or time, Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana. She feels more myth than monarch, wrapped in stories that blend history with theatre. Some say she's a goddess in silk. Others call her clever, cunning, cold. You've heard that she wears armour beneath her dresses and sleeps only 2 hours a night, that she speaks 7 languages and kills with a glance, that she once danced for 6 straight hours without breaking a sweat. You know, deep down, that most of this is nonsense. But the best lies are the ones you want to be true. She rules from a distance, of course, but her influence trickles down like rain through the thatch. New taxes, that's the Queen's government. Strange men with better boots showing up asking questions, the Queen's court, a travelling magistrate telling you which prayer books are legal now, direct orders from Her Majesty. Even when you stub your toe or run out of salt, someone in the village will mutter, "Thanks be to Queen Bess," in a tone that's only half respectful. Still, she is somehow beloved. Even the cynics admit she's held the throne longer than most thought possible, especially for a woman, especially for a Tudor. You've heard the family tree tangled as ivy. Her father had 6 wives. Her mother lost her head. Her siblings died or vanished, and yet here she stands, a crown in her hair and a dagger in her smile. She's outlasted rebellions, survived assassination attempts, and turned being unmarried into a weapon instead of a weakness. You don't understand all of it, but it feels impressive, even from here. If you're a boy, maybe you've dreamed of joining her court, not as a noble, that's beyond reach, but as a squire, a servant, a guard. You imagine gold buttons and long hallways, feasts that never end. If you're a girl, maybe you've imagined being a lady-in-waiting, gliding through palace chambers in brocade and pearls, brushing shoulders with power. Or maybe you've pictured marrying someone at court, not a duke, but someone with shoes that don't leak and enough money to hire servants. Dreams are currency, after all. Even poor ones spend well. You hear stories of what court life is like. Banquets with fire-breathing jesters, dances with steps so complicated they require practice weeks in advance, dresses so wide they need their own doorways. You laugh, but secretly you hope it's all true. Not because you want the dresses, well, maybe a little, but because it means there's a world out there where people live with colour and silk and music instead of mud and pottage. But you also know that court is dangerous. Everyone says so. One wrong look, one poorly timed joke, and you could be out. Or worse. There are factions, politics, favourites. The Queen plays people like a harper, they say, setting nobles against each other to keep herself secure. You've heard of men who rose too fast and fell faster. Women who thought they could charm her, only to find themselves married off to someone exiled in Ireland. And then there's the fashion, the gowns, the collars, the sleeves that could double as sails. These aren't clothes, they're armour. Every stitch says, I am powerful, I am untouchable. You've seen people try to imitate the look at festivals. With whatever scraps and ribbons they can find, it never quite works, but everyone understands the attempt. Dress like royalty, walk like royalty, and maybe for a day you'll forget that your boots leak and your teeth ache. One of the strangest things is how the Queen uses her body as a symbol. No husband, no children, she is England, she says. Her marriage is to the kingdom. It sounds poetic when the priest says it. It sounds slightly mad when your aunt repeats it during supper, but you believe it. Because in a world where so many women disappear into men's names, Elizabeth has made hers stand alone. Not everyone loves her, of course. Some still grumble about her being a woman. Others whisper about her treatment of Catholics, or the executions, or the endless taxes. But they whisper. No one shouts, not unless they want to be arrested, or disappear. The Queen has spies. Everyone knows this. Men and women with forgettable faces who listen more than they speak. You once joked about the Queen's teeth behind the stable. The next day, someone you'd never seen before offered to sell your father a new prayer book. Coincidence? Maybe, but you stopped joking after that. Fringe fact, some folks believe Elizabeth was actually a man in disguise. It's one of those wild stories you hear from travelling peddlers after too much ale. Something about a dead daughter, a switched identity, and a lifelong effort to hide the truth under corsets and wigs. You don't believe it. Not really, but you think about it sometimes. What if? What would it even change? Historians love debating whether Elizabeth was truly loved or just feared well. They study her speeches, her portraits, her letters. Some argue she was a master manipulator, spinning gold from crisis. Others insist she was lonely, trapped in the role she created. You don't know which is true, you just know that she survived. And in Tudor England, that's a miracle all by itself. Still, her face is everywhere. On coins, on banners, on plates that no one dares use for actual food. She's in plays and poems. She's the subject of dreams, nightmares, and bedtime warnings. The Queen wouldn't like that, your mother mutters when you slouch, and you straighten up, instinctively. That night you sit outside and look up at the stars. Somewhere miles and miles away the Queen is doing the same. Maybe she's pacing a chamber in her palace, thinking about Spain or France or which noble to banish next. Or maybe she's asleep in a bed so large it could swallow your house. You don't know. You'll probably never know, but it doesn't matter, because her shadow still stretches all the way to your doorstep. The seasons rule your life more firmly than any monarch. You might pray to the Queen and kneel before the church, but it's the weather that holds your fate in its rough, calloused hand. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, they don't just change the view outside your window. They decide what you eat, how you sleep, whether you live or die. You feel them in your bones, in your fingers, in the way your body adjusts without asking. And you learn early that no matter what you want, the earth moves on its own schedule. Spring starts soft. The first green pokes through the mud like a whispered apology after months of grey. Snow melts into slush. The sun stays a little longer in the sky each evening. You notice buds on the trees, lambs in the fields, and birds singing like their mum. I've never heard of winter. The smell changes too. Wet dirt, growing things, a hint of sweetness that makes your chest feel lighter. It's not warm yet, not really, but it's no longer cold in that bone-deep, hopeless way. Everyone begins to move faster. You sow, you mend, you clean. Spring means work. Turning soil, planting seeds, cutting kindling, checking roofs for leaks. The village hums with purpose. Hope creeps in, hesitant but steady. The cows give more milk. The hens lay better. You steal a few minutes barefoot in the grass and pretend the world might be kind this year. Summer is busier than you thought possible. Early summer is for weeding, for watching, for measuring rain and sun, like you're bargaining with the sky. Late summer is harvest. Utter, grinding, non-stop harvest. You rise before dawn, work until your shoulders burn, collapse into sleep, and wake to do it all again. Everyone helps. children, elders, travellers passing through. The fields demand it. This is when you gather enough food to last until spring comes around again, which feels impossibly far away even as you sweat beneath the relentless sun. It's not all misery. There's music sometimes, shared meals in the fields, jugs of warm ale passed from hand to hand. You eat plums so ripe they burst in your mouth, fall asleep with dirt still under your nails, and dream of rivers and cool shadows. And sometimes there's love, or at least the summer version of it. Quick glances, long walks, kisses behind haystacks. It's a season of risk, of pretending you have more freedom than you do. But the storms come too, hard, fast and vengeful, a week's worth of wheat flattened in one night, a cow killed by lightning, the roof torn off the granary just as it was being filled. The good years feel like grace, the bad ones like punishment, and you never know which you're going to get until it's far too late to do anything about it. Then comes autumn, your favourite, maybe. It feels like breathing out after a long, tight breath. The harvest is in, the fields are quieter, the air turns crisp, the sky impossibly clear. Smoke drifts from every chimney. Apples are pressed into cider. Pumpkins and squashes pile high in cellars. It's a time of gratitude, of holding tight to what you've managed to gather and pretending it will be enough. Autumn has its own sort of beauty. The leaves burn gold and red. The mornings shimmer with frost. You wear layers again, rough wool that smells of sheep and smoke. Everything slows down. Not in a lazy way, but in a deliberate, measured rhythm that matches your heartbeat. You walk a little taller. You feel, briefly, like maybe you've won something. But winter doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. The cold arrives like a beast, sharp, sudden, and hungry. It chews through your shoes, your sleeves, your bones. You stuff cracks in the walls with rags and dried moss. You pile blankets like armour. And still you shiver. Firewood disappears faster than you can split it. Water freezes in buckets. Your breath fogs in front of your face, even indoors. Food runs low. You ration. You count. You whisper prayers over cellars and hope the rats aren't too clever this year. Sometimes the meat goes bad, sometimes the flour moulds, and sometimes when the wind howls outside and the chimney won't draw, you look around and quietly wonder who will make it to spring. But winter isn't just death. It's also stillness, reflection. Families huddled together in the same room, telling stories, mending clothes, singing songs that are older than memory. It's the only season where you're allowed to rest, truly rest without guilt. The fields sleep. The animals huddle. You curl into yourself and breathe. It's also when you feel the most connected to the people around you, not by choice, but by necessity. You share food, you trade wool for eggs, tools for salt, you take care of the sick, even the ones you don't like. You watch each other closely, not just for signs of illness, but for despair, because winter brings that too. Quiet, creeping despair that wraps around you like a second shadow. You've seen people vanish into it. You fight to keep your own flame lit. Quirky fact, some Tudor folks believed that sleeping too much in winter made you too full of phlegm and sluggish all year, so you were encouraged to wake early even when it was freezing, just to keep your humours balanced. You've tried, once, never again, and Scholars sometimes argue that the harshness of the Tudor seasons built character, that it forged resilience. But resilience feels like a pretty word scholars use when they don't have to live through frostbite and famine. What you feel isn't noble strength. It's stubborn survival. It's gritted teeth, shared stew, and the quiet refusal to die. But then one day, usually when you've given up hoping, you hear a bird sing again. The snow thins, a bud appears, and just like that, the cycle begins again. You've made it. Barely. Again. And you'll do it all over. Because you have to. Because it's what's done. That night, wrapped in every scrap of warmth you own, you stare at the beams above your head and whisper thanks, not to the Queen, not to the priest, but to the seasons themselves, the cruel, generous, beautiful seasons, because in the end, they are the only kings that matter. If there's one constant in your life, it's work. From the moment your legs are strong enough to carry a bucket, your day belongs to labour, not noble labour, not poetic, sunrise over the fields kind of labour. Just hard, repetitive, back-breaking, finger-splitting work. No one asks if you like it. No one asks if you're tired. And no one, not even for a second, pretends you have another option. There's no such thing as a weekend. That concept won't exist for centuries. Holy days, yes. Feast days, sure. But days off just because you need a break? No. Your tasks change depending on the season, the weather, and your gender, but the work itself never stops. And the thing is, it begins early. Childhood, as you might have gathered by now, is less a phase of life and more a brief window before responsibility slams shut like a barn door in a windstorm. If you're in a village, your life is rural. The rhythm of the year is agricultural and everything revolves around what can be planted, harvested, or kept alive long enough to make it to slaughter. In spring and summer, you wake before the sun. You walk barefoot to avoid wearing out your only shoes. You weed, dig, carry, and sweat. In autumn, you harvest until your arms go numb. In winter, you chop wood until your fingers crack. You're a tool, a small, replaceable, dirt-covered tool. Your hands tell your story, the skin is calloused and stained. Your nails are never clean. You get splinters so often you don't even bother picking them out anymore, unless they start to rot. You've burnt yourself on the hearth, bruised yourself on the cart, and once sliced your palm open on a scythe that didn't look nearly that sharp until it was inside you. That one took days to heal, and you worked through it anyway, because no one else was going to gather the firewood. If you're a boy, your chores are often outdoors. Livestock, crops, construction, anything that involves lifting or bleeding. If you're a girl, it's indoor drudgery, cooking, spinning, cleaning, tending to babies and sick relatives, and preparing food that vanishes before you get a proper bite. The irony? No one says your work is less important. They just act like it is. Until it isn't done, then suddenly it's the end of the world. Some tasks you don't mind. You like collecting eggs in the morning, warm and speckled, still fragrant from the straw. You like stirring a pot over the fire and feeling like you're making something from almost nothing. You like the weight of the milk pail in your hand, the careful way you pour without spilling a drop. These small victories pile up. They're not glamorous, but they're yours. But there are tasks you hate. Slaughtering day. That one sticks with you. The noise, the smell, the way the pigs scream when they know what's coming. You hold the bucket. You try not to flinch. You help pour the blood into the trench, trying to pretend it's just red water. Later you scrape the hide or carry pieces to the salt barrel. That night you eat pork and try not to remember the look in the animal's eyes. Then there's the spinning. Endless, mind-numbing spinning. If you're a girl, you start as soon as your fingers are long enough to hold the distaff. You twist the fibres with your fingers, humming to pass the time, praying you don't drop the thread and ruin the rhythm. The best spinners can do it without even looking, their hands moving like magic. You aim for that level of skill, not because it's fun, but because it gets you praised, which is the closest thing to love some girls ever get. And don't get started on laundry. Picture a riverbank, a pile of cloth that weighs more wet than you weigh dry, and water so cold it makes your bones ache. Now add a paddle, a smoothed piece of wood used to beat the filth from the fabric. Now do it for hours. You smell better when you finish, but only slightly, and by the next morning you're dirty again. If you're lucky, you learn a trade. You become an apprentice to someone who makes shoes or barrels or candles. You spend 7 years fetching tools, cleaning floors and watching closely. Maybe by the end, you'll earn a place in the guild. Maybe you'll be allowed to wear a leather apron with pride to charge for your work. Maybe. But even that's work. Monotonous, exhausting, and never really yours. You're always answering to someone. Always working for someone else's profit. There's an odd pride in it, though. In knowing how to do something well. In seeing a finished wall, a perfectly cooked loaf, a bucket full of ripe apples, and knowing your hands did that. You may not get praised, but you notice. And sometimes, on rare days, someone else does too. Fringe fact. Tudor folks believed that idleness invited the devil. Laziness wasn't just a moral failing, it was dangerous. So even on days when there wasn't much to do, tasks were invented. Clean the floor again. Wash the walls. Pick the snails from the garden. Better to be exhausted than tempted. You once tried pretending to be asleep to avoid chores. Your mother saw through it instantly. The devil finds children in bed, she said, and yanked off your blanket. There's a scholarly debate about whether Tudor labourers truly worked longer hours than modern ones. Some argue that feast days and religious holidays gave peasants more breaks than today's 9-to-5ers. Others point out that the labour itself was harder, more physical, more immediate. No unions, no lunch breaks, no such thing as retirement. You work until you can't. Then you beg or starve or hope your children are stronger than you were. But through it all, there's community. You're not working alone. There's always someone nearby, grunting under the same weight, muttering the same curses, singing the same work songs. You joke with the girl at the spinning wheel. You trade bread for onions with the boy mending boots. You listen to the old man with crooked hands talk about how he used to swing an axe all day, every day, and you believe him, because your hands feel the same ache already. That night you fall into bed, not with grace, but like a sack of stones. Every muscle aches. Your palms sting, your stomach's half full. But you've earned your sleep. It's not luxurious, not comfortable, but it's honest. And as you close your eyes, you think, not for the first time, that maybe work is the one part of life you understand completely. You were born to labour. You will die having laboured. Everything else is just noise. You don't spend much time thinking about death until you do. Then it's all you can think about. It lurks in every cough, every bad piece of meat, every strange look in someone's eyes. Death isn't rare here. It's normal, common, intimate. You've seen more dead bodies by the time you're 10 than some people will in a modern lifetime. Neighbours, animals, friends, strangers, life leaves fast and rarely with warning. You first understood death when you saw a child laid out on a wooden board in your neighbour's cottage, still wrapped in the linen that had once swaddled them for life. The baby had stopped crying one morning and never started again. People came in, murmuring prayers, gently closing the little eyelids. Someone placed a coin on the chest. You were told not to touch. You were told to be quiet. The house smelled like candle wax and boiled herbs. It stayed with you. It always does. Death doesn't wait for old age. That's something only the luckiest people earn. For most, it's a slip on the stairs, a fever after a cold day, a blade drawn too quickly, a poorly cooked fish. You hear of men killed in tavern brawls over spilled ale, of women dying in childbirth with no priest nearby, of entire families felled by a bad batch of spoiled grain. The margin for error is so thin it might as well be imaginary. You've seen plague too, or at least heard of it. The village down the river lost half its people one summer. A cart came by for the bodies, drawn by a man wearing rags soaked in vinegar. You don't know if the vinegar helped, but the smell of it clings to your memory like smoke. They burned everything, bedding, clothes, even the tools. You were told not to speak of it, but everyone did, in hushed tones and hurried glances. Funerals are simple. A bell tolls low and slow. The body is wrapped and placed in the earth quickly, sometimes too quickly, if there's suspicion of plague. The priest says the words. The family weeps or doesn't. There's not much room for elaborate mourning when survival is still on the list of daily chores. You cry quietly if you cry at all. Grief is something you carry, not something you perform. Still, there are rituals. You close the shutters when someone dies. You cover mirrors. You stop the clocks if you have one. These things aren't law, but they feel older than law. They're how you mark the line between here and not here. You light a candle and keep it burning, not because you think it helps, but because not doing it would feel like a dare. Wakes are quiet affairs, full of bread and ale and quiet reminiscence. Sometimes people tell stories, sometimes they just sit in silence, staring at the fire, hands wrapped around mugs like they're afraid to let go. The body lies in the next room or right there in the corner. You get used to it. The stillness. The way people step around it like furniture. It isn't morbid. It's just life, or the end of it. There are strange beliefs too. Some say the soul lingers for 3 days after death. That you shouldn't speak ill of the dead lest they overhear and get restless. That burying someone face down keeps their spirit from rising again. That a dead man's toenails keep growing for days, which upon closer inspection is just an illusion caused by shrinking skin. But still, you check. And there's always fear. Not just of dying, but of dying wrong. Dying without last rites, dying in sin, dying alone. Those deaths worry people the most. They worry the priest. They worry your mother. She's said more than once that she doesn't fear the end, only the idea of being unprepared for it. So you're told to confess often, to make peace with your neighbours, to keep your soul tidy, just in case. Quirky fact, some Tudor families used to bury a slice of bread with the dead, just in case they got hungry on their way to the afterlife. Others tucked scissors under the pillow to cut any invisible threads holding the soul to the world. You've asked why a spirit would need scissors. No one answers. They just shake their head and keep doing it. There's an odd comfort in how matter-of-fact everyone is about it. People die, you mourn, you move on, because you don't care, but because you can't afford not to. The next chore is waiting. The next mouth is open. Grief is a luxury most of you don't have time for. You carry it like a pebble in your shoe. There, persistent, but not enough to stop you walking. Scholars today argue whether Tudor England was obsessed with death or merely pragmatic about it. There are skulls carved into tombstones, death dances painted on walls, whole books about how to die properly. But there's also a deep, persistent reverence, a sense that death is not a punishment, just a passage, a step onto the next road. Some say the poor feared death more than the rich. Others argue the opposite. The rich had more to lose. The poor knew it was always close by, like a neighbour with poor manners and a key to your front door. You're not sure where you fall. You don't want to die, but you know you will. And you hope, when it comes, that it's quick, quiet and clean. That night the moon is full and the wind sighs through the gaps in your wall. You lie awake for a while, thinking about everyone you've lost. Your grandmother, that boy who drowned in the river, the girl who vanished last winter and was never found. You say their names in your head, like a prayer. You don't believe in ghosts, not really, but you leave the window open a crack, just in case they want to hear their names again.